Oh, sorry, someone's recording. Okay, got it. So Monmouthshire has got really, really diverse habitats, as you probably all know. And because of the diverse habitats we've got, including species of trees and plant species, it's really, really good for bat species. And the actual ravine woodland we've got, places like Whitebrook and the Wye Valley, Catbrook, it's just excellent. And we've got all sorts of things. We've got woodlands, rivers, ravines, meadows, hedgerows, caves and mines, which are really important, and lots of old buildings and really good connectivity. As you can see from the map, if you look on the right-hand side, coming down from sort of Pencraig, Colford, down through Monmouth to Landover to Chepstow is pretty much all wooded for the whole stretch of that. And then you've got Chepstow Park Wood and Wentwood leading up to, leading across to Killeen, again, which is fantastic habitats. I won't dwell too long on the species we've got. You can see them on the screen. So it's 2 horseshoe species, 7 myotis, which are the mouse-eared species, 3 different types of pipistrelles, 2 long-eared, 2 noctulus species, 1 barbastyle and 1 ectesicus, which is the ceratine. Again, like I say, this is subject to change because we're seeing more bats coming in. So how did bats evolve? Well, there's 2 trains of thought. The first is that they were sort of marsupial type things, which were tree dwellers and used to grab insects and then started flying to try and catch them. And then the other thought is they may have been sort of gliders that adapted the ability to be able to fly, and they're only flying mammal, basically. This picture here is just of a lesser horseshoe bat at a site that I took years ago that was going to be developed, and it was just a bat on its own. So the breeding season, you've got an annual cycle from autumn to winter. What's really interesting is that the bats swarm, especially in myotis species, swarm around August, September time, and they mate at that time, but they don't actually get pregnant until the following spring, when the female is able to conceive, long time after actual mating. They normally have about 1 pup a year. Some bats, the Lyslers particularly, are known to have 2 every now and then. They're flying after, the pups are flying after about 4 weeks. And here's the big one. They change roosts about every 2 to 3 days, depending on the species. Some bats change roosts about every 1 to 2 days, particularly in trees. So within the Wye Valley, as you know, we've got lots and lots of ancient woodland that's managed and unmanaged. So we've got lots of different opportunities for bat roosting. So bats can have normally about 40 or 50 roosts in trees within any area, and they change roosts about 1 to 2 days. So if you wanted to look at any particular tree to see if there was a roost there or not, you'd have to be at that tree for pretty much every day for about 30 days. So it's really hard to find bat roosts in trees. And I would say about 70% of the trees that I've climbed or surveyed, 70%, maybe a little bit more, maybe 80% don't have bats in them. We never find the bats in them, very rarely. So each tree in woodlands has potential roost features. That can be anything from bark flaking or splits in the branches, woodpecker holes, frost cracks, literally anything. But I found bats in all sorts of places, including in steel pipes within a cellar. So lots of different areas. And when we're doing surveys of trees, we have to take into account all these different things as well as the habitats, and then decide whether we're going to do summer or winter surveys to try and ascertain whether there are bats there. The summer surveys, very difficult because of the canopy cover, so we can't really categorically say that there are no bats in a tree during the summer. We've actually had at Whitebrook, I think it was, we had a barbastyle bat which had a radio tag attached to it when we were doing the research, and we knew which tree the bat was in. There were 4 of us around the tree with infrared cameras, detectors, and the telemetry for tracking the bat. And there were 4 of us there, and none of us saw the bat exit the tree. So it's very, very difficult. So we have to do, in those situations, it's better to do climbing surveys where we're going up into the trees and looking to see what we can find. Sorry about that. Let's just go back one. Oh, that's great. Okay, so down to the best bit, the woodland habitat we've got. This slide is typical of the Wye Valley in the springtime. And as you can see, it's a lot of oak species with beech and particularly yew trees in some areas. So this kind of habitat with the ride going down through the trees is absolutely ideal for bats, because they tend to use linear features for commuting and for foraging. So these rides are very important. I'll just go to the next slide. This is a kind of typical roost feature we have, where you've got a split in the tree, and the bats will use the cracks at the top of the tree to roost, either just overnight, over the daytime, or they might use it as a permanent roost. That sort of feature probably wouldn't be much use as a maternity roost, because it's a little bit too open and too windy and too much airflow. But that is a typical sort of feature of a bat roost. Okay, so this little guy is a tree specialist. This is a Bechstein's bat. This is one of the bats that we were doing research on in the Wye Valley, which is ongoing actually. Stephen Davison's still doing it, I believe. This was the first, I think it was the first Bechstein's bat to be found in Monmouthshire. People were saying that they didn't exist in Monmouthshire. Well, they do, along with lots of other bats that don't exist in Monmouthshire, I'm afraid. Yeah, very nice bat and fairly rare. So we'll go back one. So this is another woodland bat. This is a long-eared bat. I think this was a brown long-eared. Again, it was captured in near Chepstow, in the woodlands, and was, I don't think we tracked this. We didn't put a radio tag on this one. We just let it go. But it's quite a nice little bat. This is the one that we tend to use for, if we do talks, we tend to use them because they look nice, as opposed to something like the Barbastell bat, which is not the best looking bat, I'm afraid. So this is another Bechstein's that was caught down near Wincliffe. As you can see, it's got a pink face. The ears are quite big because that's part of its evolution for being a woodland dwelling bat. So they've got very good hearing. The tragus here is huge, which amplifies the sound going into the ear. The way to identify this bat, by the way, is you can see it's got a very pink face, large ears, and between the ears, you can probably fit your little finger or maybe an index finger between the 2 ears, whereas with the long-eared bat, there's no gap. This is the Barbastell bat. This is very rare in Monmouthshire. In fact, it's very rare across the country nationally. As you can see, it's got absolutely huge ears. Very much a woodland bat. Huge ears, huge tragus here, and its eyes are literally in the ear, so it's got very good hunting skills and can pinpoint an insect on a leaf in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night without any problem at all. Very quiet, excuse me, very quiet bat, very hard to detect. Okay, so other tree users we have are pipistrelles, dog bentons, Naturals, long-eared whiskered bats, and liselers. This is a Natural's bat, I believe. Yeah, I think that was a Natural's bat. Again, was caught in Wincliffe. Sorry if I'm speeding through this, but I want to be able to take your questions at the end. So, okay, how do bats use trees? So basically for rest, shelter, or foraging, commuting and navigation. Obviously, some of the areas we've got in Monmouthshire are just absolutely prime key foraging zones. And the management of those is really, really important, as is the connectivity to those sites from different areas. I won't go through that because I've already said that. So this is the kind of feature you get in oak trees, where this hole was actually a bit large for any sort of bat roosting, because predators can get in and predate the bats. So bats tend to use smaller holes into hollow areas within the trees, like this. So this is what we call a bark inclusion. So bats can get in about here, and then in this one, I think the roost was in this side. Up here, there was a hollow area in here, and the bats were using that for roosting. This was a site. This was a day roost. I think it's just a couple of bats in the Black Mountains, I believe, which we found in an old oak tree. Quite a small hole, and again, predators couldn't really get into it, so it was quite good for them. This is a feature which is a branch tear out by the looks of it in an oak tree, in an old ancient oak woodland. The actual hole itself, you can see at the base of the hole, there's a lot of staining here. Now, sometimes this staining can be from the actual oak tannins, water getting in maybe at the top of the branch coming down. But this one was a bat roost, and this was the staining from bat urine and feces all being mixed up, and it stains black. And that's one of the indicators that it might be a roost. This is a hazard beam split that, again, long-eared bats tend to like these. You can get in, squeeze right up into the top, and they're protected. Bark flaking is an absolute favourite of Bechstein's Barberstyle bats. So with bark flaking, it's obviously you get temperature fluctuations, you get a lot of moisture changes, airflow changes, light and predation, but somehow they still seem to use them. They still seem to like this type of roost, which goes against most of the other bats, because the other bats like it to be dark and very still. Moisture content is probably as high as possible, but certainly 80% moisture, and where they can't be predated. So bark flaking is a very, very strange one. So just a little bit about surveying. So in the winter time, obviously it's best to survey at that time of year, because you haven't got the canopy getting in the way of features. It's a lot easier to get around the tree, and you just find more. This tree was actually one of the Gwent Wildlife Trust's previous chairman, I think it was. It was a fantastic tree, huge oak tree, lots and lots and lots of potential features, but as usual, we didn't find anything because they changed roosts so often. Here's quite a good photograph of a roost that I found near Far Hill, I think this one was, and it was in a barn with a glass front. A chap had been developing the barn, and for some reason had stopped, but he put all French windows along the front. So inside the barn was absolutely boiling hot in the summer, really hot, and very, very light. We didn't really have to use torches to find them. And there was a maternity roost of lesser horseshoe bats. So with this photograph, you can see the pup, the baby bat is darker, and then you've got the female, the mother bat, and the baby suckling. One of the things about this photograph that's quite sad is that in this barn, you can see it's got breathable membranes. So this membrane is quite dangerous for bats, because you can see where the bat's feet are here, that it frays and it gets caught up. So one of the challenges that we have to face is the use of these membranes in buildings. And when it comes to development, it's really important that they don't use these where bats are present, because they are very, very dangerous. So on to the interesting bit. This is a photograph of Natasha that did the research with us in the lower Wye Valley. We go out maybe 30, 40 times a year to either do monitoring of known roosts or go out and record bats where they're commuting or foraging. We get call outs for all sorts of things, going to people's houses to do bat talk, to do bat visits because they're afraid of bats or they got bats in the house. So the actual monitoring of bats is really, really important. And unfortunately, it's not done enough. There's not enough people who will go out at night time with detectors and torches and just look for bats. So some of the research that I've been involved in was Lady Park Wood National Nature Reserve. This was a strange one for me because it was partly in England, partly in Wales. The actual wood itself was clear felled about 85, 90 years ago, and then made into a natural nature reserve. So it's an unmanaged woodland on the side of the River Wye near Simmons Yat, near the Biblins. And the project I was looking at, still am in fact, is whether managed woodland is better for bat species than unmanaged. And it was quite surprising. The actual results that I started to get were that the managed woodland was actually better because it created wind areas and airflow areas, which in times of storms the trees would deteriorate because of the storm damage, and that provided further better roosts for bats. Whereas the unmanaged woodland at Lady Park was quite sheltered, so I'm guessing the geography of it is a big factor. But it's quite sheltered, and we didn't have hardly any roost features, which was a little bit strange. And of course, because it was 80 or 90-year-old trees, there was hardly any disease or decay in them apart from squirrel damage. We've got the Beckstein Barbastell Bat project, which I believe is ongoing with Steve Davison down in the bottom of the Wye Valley. Each year we have the National Bat Monitoring Programme, summer and winter counts, maternity roosts and hibernation roosts. I do about 2 or 3 of those each winter, and then maybe 1 or 2 in the summer. But Monmouthshire Bat Group do a lot of the summer counts. Places like Landowners and at Newton Court in Monmouth. So monitoring of the mitigation. The mitigation I'm talking about is from developments. So with all the development that's happening in Monmouthshire and surrounding areas, with residential especially, mitigation has to be put in to ensure that bats are not impacted, and the favourable conservation status is not impacted by as a result of the development. So we have to monitor mitigation to make sure that the bats are well catered for and they get to net gain in biodiversity habitats. So it's basically putting in bat houses, bat boxes on trees and in buildings. The main thing is about all of this is that we actually know very little about bats compared to bird species, which are really, really surveyed, and there's a lot of sort of historical data from that. But with bats, I suppose it's because it's nighttime and it's sort of early hours of the morning, so there's not a lot of people who are doing it, and every day we're getting more and more information about bats and learning more and more about them and understanding how they live and breed. So discovering new species, as I said earlier, we do get new species. Fairly recently, within the last sort of 10 years, there's been the Alcathoe bat has been found, which they thought was a whiskered bat until somebody started looking a bit closer and got some DNA analysis done, and then discovered it was a completely new species. So we do get new bats. Sorry if I'm waffling on a bit. So the challenges and threats to bats are residential and industrial development. So particularly in Monmouthshire, the residential developments are really impacting on all of wildlife, not just bats. The industrial development, not so much, but we really do need to sort of keep an eye on what's happening with the residential buildings, because the government have to build, we know that, but I don't think they're doing enough personally to protect wildlife whilst they're doing it. We've then got current agriculture and forestry practices. So there's a bit of a problem at the moment with ash dieback and the disease in larch, where you're getting large scale forestry operations taking place, which don't really take account of what the impact is going to be on bat species, unfortunately. The agriculture part of it is, again, it's still things like pesticides, wormers, ivermectin, things like that are affecting the actual food sources for bats. Pollution of rivers and water catchment areas, well, that's been really well documented recently. Bats do use the rivers; they have to drink, so they'll use rivers and water catchment areas for that. And if those areas are polluted, then that's going to have an impact. Climate change, again, we all know that climate change is going to have an impact. It certainly is with bats, because as we get warmer, you get more of a fluctuation of bats going up country, up to the north, and horseshoe bat species, which are kind of a Mediterranean species, are expanding further north every year. We keep finding more roosts of horseshoe bat species further north. Bureaucracy, communication, and education. I don't really want to go into that because it becomes a bit sort of emotional and political for me. But I would just say that I don't think that people are doing enough in the authorities to actually get around the communication bit, particularly to do with bats. And then we've got legislation enforcement, which in my experience isn't being anywhere near robust enough. Just so I say thank you for listening. I've waffled on. This is my first Zoom meeting that I've done a presentation on, so it's been a big learning curve for me. If you've got any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. Your first Zoom, that went
That was
well. Hopefully you won't have to be doing many more of them. You'll be doing them all in person again in the future. But there we go. That all went very smoothly. So thank you.
It was.
Thanks for doing that. And I just love seeing all the faces of them. To be honest, even the one you say is ugly is I think he's quite.
The barber's
got a sweet little character, to be honest.
It's great. It's a great bat, and they're really elusive. They've got this ability to fly straight towards a mist net, and then literally at the last minute up and over the top. How they see it is just incredible. But with their ears, such big ears and eyes in the ears, basically, they're such good navigators, and you know they're not going to fly into anything, and hence we didn't catch hardly any of those. Very rare. We saw them, but we didn't catch them because they knew the nets were there. So
right, well, we've got a few questions here. If you
sure.
Steve, says it's a really interesting talk. So thanks, Steve. Do you have any recommendations for bat protecting equipment?
Yes, I do, but it all depends on how much mortgage you want to take out. So for starting off, a batch box duet or magenta is an ideal piece of kit. I started with a batch box duet, and it doesn't record bats. You just literally hear them on a heterodyne, so it's like a series of clicks. But the good thing about it is, if you're out with somebody that's experienced and is licensed, you hear the bats, and they do have subtle differences in the tones and the speed and everything else of the calls. So you can get to hear which bat is which. And I would recommend that for everybody. Anyone that's interested in listening to bats or looking for bats as part of research is learn to listen to bats and know each call. Then you don't have to keep looking at screens to see what the frequency is or anything else. Because as soon as you look at a screen on a detector, your night sight goes because it's just too bright. For doing professional survey work, or if you want to look into the sonograms of bats, I would recommend the Elecon Bats Logger, which is they're a little bit expensive. I think they're about 1,500 quid now. But they're really worthwhile because when you get the software for free, Bat Explorer software comes free with them, and you can put it on the screen and you get the sonogram, the pitch, the frequencies. It even gives you a map of where you were when you detected that bat, which is really helpful because you can just record the whole thing. It also gives you a suggested species list, which is really funny. But my wife and I, we kind of laugh at it when we're doing the sonogram analysis. We record maybe a long-eared, brown long-eared bat, or a long-eared bat, or a Natur's bat, and we're getting some sort of Myotis bat from Afghanistan or something like that, you know, that's being suggested as the species. So you've got to be a bit careful with that, and sort of take it with a pinch of salt sometimes. But yeah, the batlogger, the Elecon batloggers are really good. I like them a lot. The Anabat SD2. Oh, by the way, the batlogger has great functions on it as well. You can change the format, so you can have either heterodyne, which is you can hear it like a series of clicks, or you can go to time expansion, which gives you a different sound. So you've got two different systems there. Sorry, I won't go on about bat detectors anymore. I'll ask for another question.
There we go. Thanks for that, Steve. That was comprehensive stuff there. Yeah,
no, sorry, I'm waffling on a bit.
Technology on bat detectors now, but right, we have John and Marilyn say they've got a lesser horseshoe bat that's been hanging around in their shed for 5 years or so. Last year it was active until late November, and it was back again in mid-February for a few days. Is this normal?
No, I think where they live is just not normal. It's just, no, seriously. Hi, John. Hi, Marilyn. Yeah, bats, they will fly in the winter. They fly in the daylight because they have to survive. I mean, bats, when they start hibernating, they've got a choice whether to stay in hibernation and use up the fat reserves that they have to try and survive, or do they wake up and fly and try to find insects? Now, waking up uses a lot of energy that they could otherwise use for being hibernating. The actual echolocation and flying uses loads of energy. So it's a fine line. It's an energetics issue, whether they fly or not. So certainly on the warmer days, we're seeing bats in woodlands, particularly in the Wye Valley, which are flying during the day, and that includes horseshoe bat species, which John and Marilyn have. Last week, I was doing some forestry operations, and as part of the operations, I just had a nose round in a very small cave, maybe 6 foot by 8 foot cave, and there was a lesser horseshoe bat in there. The following day, it had gone, it had flown off, so it was obviously not disturbed by what we were doing. But it had just flown off, and then the day after that we saw it flying around during the daytime, about 11 o'clock in the morning, flying around, and it was purely because it was a lovely sunny day, and the ground was being disturbed, you know, sort of 30-40 meters from the cave. The ground's being disturbed, and it throws up insects, and of course the bats want the insects. So yeah, they do.
Thank you, Steve. Right, since bats move roost regularly, it doesn't sound like there's much point in a bat box. Would you agree?
Sorry, was it not much point in a bat box?
Yeah.
Huh. If I was able to, and I'm not, I would make the local authority put a bat box in every new house, because they are so important. So the bat boxes are used for maternity roosts, they're used for hibernation, they're used for transitional roosts, which are massively important, transitional roosts. And I'll explain a little bit if I may. So if you've got a key foraging zone, like, I don't know, let's take Colonel's Park Wood, up near Whitebrook, sorry. If you've got somewhere like Colonel's Park Wood, and then for some unknown reason, the connectivity from that wood is taken away slightly through either forestry operations or taking out hedgerows, agricultural management or whatever, then sometimes the bats are not able to get to where they want to go. So having a bat box in that location could be make or break for bats, because they'll use it to get as a stopover, like a hotel if you like, from one foraging area to another, or even from the breeding area to the hibernation area. It could be a couple of days flying or a couple of nights flying, and they need these little places. So, bat boxes are really important, and I think we should literally put up loads and loads and loads of them. Definitely. It doesn't have to be a bat box, actually. I think it can pretty much be anything. Do you remember a while ago we looked at using old boots, on nailing old boots into trees and things, because when they're put upside down, they're fantastic for bats. But if they're put the right way up, then they're great for bird nesting. And so it was a really cheap and effective way of creating habitats for bats.
You're right, everyone collect up your old boots and get them.
Yeah, your old boots and tie them to trees.
Like the more potential bat roosts, the better. So obviously everyone who's got their land there, if they want to put up bat boxes, it's all good. Right, the next one, you see places where bats are feeding in churches. Does this indicate a roost and a nursery in the church?
It depends. Yeah, it kind of depends on the shape, the pattern of where the droppings are and where the urine staining is in churches. I'm quite a believer that sometimes, not just churches, but any buildings, bats can and do fly into buildings, leave droppings and fly out again. Just because there are droppings there doesn't mean to say it's a roost. Okay, but certainly if you've got an accumulation of droppings in a corner or underneath one of the arches or underneath a potential roost feature, like a gap in the woodwork or something, then yeah, I would say it's probably a roost. But you do need to get some sort of professional advice on whether there's a roost there or not. I've had quite a few arguments with various local authorities when we found bat droppings in a roof void. And I said, well, look, there's only one or two droppings. It could be that bats have flown in and out. But a lot of people sort of kind of say, no, it's a roost. A bat has been in this, so it's a roost. Well, no, it's not. It doesn't have to be a roost just because there are droppings there.
Thank you, Steve. Do large numbers of grey squirrel have an effect on roosting opportunities for bats?
Yes. Yeah, they do. Squirrels are known to predate bats. They'll eat them along with lots of other animals. But yeah, certainly grey squirrels. They'll actively hunt bats. So when we've done bat box checks, there's a place in Newent called Colin Park Wood, and some of the boxes there have been chewed by squirrels trying to get at the bats inside. So yeah, it does have an impact, but not just on bats, it's on all sorts of woodpeckers and another sort of tree nesting birds.
Right, are there any species of plant flower that will attract insects that bats feed on? So if you've got a nice bit of land and you've got more bats on your land, what sort of plants should be encouraging, I guess?
Japanese knotweed. No, seriously. Yeah, there are plants, but joking aside, Himalayan balsam and Japanese knotweed do attract insects quite a lot, and it is good for bats. But obviously, being an invasive species, you can't advocate that at all, really. But yeah, so native tree species certainly is a big one for bats. But things like honeysuckle. If you just plant honeysuckle or jasmine, basically anything that attracts a lot of insects, but native. Right.
Should we log bats which we spot onto iRecord, or are there any other websites which we should log that data? You can certainly go to Subrek before you answer, because I have to mention Subrek, but
yeah,
go for it, Steve.
Well, I think from experience, I think that a lot of the records that I've submitted to Subrek have gone to iRecord anyway.
Right, yeah, I think they all are linked up. So I think whichever one you go to, they'll find their way there in the end. But. Yeah,
especially if some of the ones that I've found that have been sort of quizzed because they're out of the area of that species. For instance, I went on a holiday to Bangor and managed to find an old ice house, the place I was staying at. And there was a lesser horseshoe and a greater horseshoe bat in the ice house, and it was, I think at the time, it was the furthest north record of that species, so it had to be verified by iRecord. But yeah, certainly, for Monmouthshire, just record, put your records into Subrec. That's for this county. If you're over in Brecon, it's still the same. I can't remember how far west you have to go or north you have to go before you get out of Subrec's region, but Subrec are excellent.
Then you're into the next one up.
Yeah, but Subrec are really good because they'll pass the record on for you to the relevant biodiversity records office anyway.
Yeah, and if your record's in there, then obviously various people can use it for conservation, and also if there were any sort of planning going on in places, that can be taken into account in the planning for road developments, new houses and stuff. So hopefully the bats will be accounted of and protected. So the more records that go in, the more we know about the bats, and the better protected they'll be. So yeah, it's great to get your records in. We've got one final question. Good. Are there any good suggestions to mitigate for the squirrels?
For the mitigating for grey squirrels?
Yeah, sort of, to sort of protect the bats from them, or perhaps even control the grey squirrels.
It all depends on your stance on what you think about grey squirrels. Personally, my own opinion is I would just get rid of the squirrels. That's my own opinion, because they are an introduction from the States, and they whether people agree or not, they do a lot of damage with trees, especially beech trees, where they'll chew the branches, which actually is, to be honest, when the squirrels chew the branches and make a mess of trees, about 10 or 15 years later, it becomes really good for bats, because that introduces decay into the branches, and then beech trees and sycamore trees especially are really good trees for bat roosts. So it's a bit of a strange one. Yes, we shouldn't have squirrels, the grey squirrels in this country anyway, but we've got them. They're kind of naturalised now, aren't they? But we shouldn't have them. But it's like a double-edged sword, isn't it? They do a lot of damage to other species, but they also make habitats for nesting birds and bats. But we have got too many. We've definitely got too many squirrels, and I would certainly manage the squirrel population.
Right, yeah. I said that was the last question. I've got one question before we end. Just how can people sort of get involved in bats a bit more? If people want to go out and help with surveys or just learn more.
Okay, so Monmouthshire Bat Group is still running. Even after COVID, they've been a bit quiet because of COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's still running. So my recommendation would be to join the Bat Group. I think it costs £5 to join the group, and then go out with people like myself, or Angus Scott or Steve Davison, who are experienced guys and got licenses, and just literally get to learn about the bats, biology and the behaviour, and then get to learn what they sound like when they're flying. Just listen to the heterodyne system of bat detectors, and they're quite inexpensive. And just get out there and just go and do it, and then buy a couple of good books maybe, and there are some good books. British Bats by John Altrincham was the book that I sort of looked at first of all, and then went on to another book, which is, I don't know if you can see this. That's probably the best book about bats in the UK and Europe. Can you see that, Andy? Yeah?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's probably the book. It's by Christian Dietz and Andres Kiefer, and I would recommend that. I think it's about £25 now to buy it, but it's got everything you need to know about bats in there.
Right, so thanks. I've got one other question here, but it's like a direct message to me, so I'm going to pass that on to you outside of here, if that's all right. Steve,
yeah, sure.
Someone with a quick query, and I'm just going to say, I think we're going to have a bat walk down at Mega in July, I think. So if people would like to come out like a beginner's kind of introduction to bats and come and join us down at Mega, we'll have lots of bat detectors and we can go and have a look. I'm going to run a moth trap the same night and look at the glowworms. So it'll be a nice evening out there. A little plug for us there. But
Excellent.
Very much, Steve. That's been great. That, and thanks for fielding all the questions. You were popular.
Oh, no problem. Just a quick one. Just thinking about Megamarsh.
Yeah.
I believe we're putting bat boxes up there on the 13th of March,
All right.
which is next weekend. Okay, so if anyone wants to come along and help with putting bat boxes up and learning about bats, then they'd be very welcome.
Great stuff. There we go. Right. Thank you very much, Steve. That was great. Thanks for giving up your time.
Oh, sorry, it was a bit rushed. My first one, so it's.
No, it went great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Cheers. Thanks, Andy. Bye, everyone.
Righty-ho. So now are we running to time? I don't know. Who knows? I think we probably are just about bang on time. So well done, Steve. Now we've got Sorrel. Sorrel's going to talk to us about the Greater Gwent State of Nature report. So if you could put Sorrel on, that would be marvellous.
Hello.
Hello there, Sorrel.
I am here. Hi everybody. Thanks, Steve, for that. That was really great. I'm just going to work out my sharing, make sure I'm sharing the right thing. There we go. How's that? Everybody seeing that?
Perfect, Sorrel.
Yeah. Good. Right. So yeah, State of Nature. I'm doing a kind of half and half talk. So I'm going to spend half of the talk talking about the State of Nature report and what we learned and how you can use it and kind of the joy that is data. You will feel exactly the same way that I do by the end of it, I promise. And half talking about what data you can access for your site, because you're landowners, you're going to be interested in what you can do on your site, your land, what you've got. So here goes. Ooh. So as conservationists, we have loads of questions about wildlife. What do we have? What's it doing? Where is it? What's going on? Are we doing the right thing as land managers? Is it working? You know, we all know that wildlife is in kind of quite dire straits at the moment, and obviously we want that trend to reverse. And so it's really important that we work out what's happening. And data is a huge part of answering those questions. So information about our species, our habitats is absolutely key. It's so key that actually it is now law in Wales. So we have the Environment Wales Act of 2016, which introduced the idea of the principles of sustainable management of natural resources. I do apologise, there are a lot of acronyms in Welsh conservation policy, SMNR this is. And two of the principles of SMNR are that you should manage adaptively by planning, monitoring, reviewing, and then where appropriate, changing action. So that forms a cycle, and data and evidence forms part of that cycle as part of your monitor and review, and also as part of when you decide your planning of what you're going to do. So evidence should inform all parts of that cycle. And you should basically keep going round and round and round until you get the results that you want. It's also for decision making that we should be taking account of relevant evidence and also gathering evidence where we don't know what's going on. And those principles are actually duty bound onto Welsh ministers and Natural Resources Wales. So you could be kind of going, oh, well, that's not me, it's okay, I don't have to do any of this data stuff. But actually, if Natural Resources Wales or the Welsh Government are going to give you any grant money, they're probably going to want to see evidence and data as part of your grant conditions. It might not be a lot, but it will definitely be there because they're bound by law to actually do this, these sustainable management of natural resources principles. And when I should have said at the beginning of the slide, we call using data in a conservation evidence-based conservation, and it is becoming much more of a focus. I mean, note the fact that Andy's job description is now evidence manager, and that's how important it is. So we're getting really to grips with using data in conservation now in a way that's not been possible previously, because we have so much information coming in from recording. We have wonderful, powerful computers and clever people who can manipulate this data and really kind of dig in and find out what's going on. So it's actually really exciting if you're a data geek like me. Which brings us to State of Nature. The first UK State of Nature was 2013, I think, where a big bunch of conservation organisations got together and said, okay, let's really find out what's going on. And as part of the same NROL bid that Andy referred to earlier, one of the strands of that was that we wanted to do a Greater Gwent equivalent. So we wanted to look at all the information about wildlife that we've got for Greater Gwent and see if we could learn anything, basically. So do a massive audit, find out what's happening. It took about 18 months, maybe 2 years. And we ended up looking at 100 species across as many different taxa as we could. And seeing what was happening to those species in terms of what information we had, what we could infer from that information, where the gaps might be, what was happening. I think we reviewed about 120,000 records as a part of that process. So that just kind of gives you like a taste of the amount of data that we have, which is fantastic. So I do urge you to go and read the report. I don't urge you to read the whole thing. It's about 800 pages long. But what I do want to kind of encourage you to do is dip into it. And if you do some dipping, you will find a dipper. Slightly scary that Steph is in the room, but I'm going to press on. For each species, you will get something like this. You'll get some blurb about the species and its ecology. You'll get a map showing the density of records for that species. So this is not abundance. This is basically recording effort. Abundance, although it would be useful to have abundance, it's very, very difficult to do because not many records will actually state a number, which is a problem. And a lot of records state things like several or a few, and it's quite hard to judge what number people actually meant when they said that. Also, even if we did have a number on every record, we're still affected by recording effort. So it's very hard to get a true measure of abundance. So we said, let's keep it simple. This is recording. So each of these represents a record. For each species, what I've done is set a maximum for each map. There's a number next to it saying this is the maximum number. For dippers, it's 127. And then the shade gets lighter for a percentage of that maximum number. So you can see these dots here, those three are going to be probably in the 100 to 127, so the top 20% of that bracket, whereas the pale ones, this is my palest colour grade, are probably going to be 20 up to 25 records. So for dippers, you can see we've got a couple of sites where there's mega recording effort. These two both correspond to country parks. I'm not sure about that one. But for the rest, it's relatively low numbers of records, but well spread across the area. For this map, this is the date of the records. by the most recent record. So again, a dark colour is good. So you can see that we've actually got recent records in the last 10 years. It's by decade. In the last 10 years across pretty much the whole of Gwent. And you can also see from the distribution of these records that it's quite obviously corresponding to our main rivers. Interestingly, it's not the Wye and the Usk, they're too big, but definitely the tributaries and the higher waters of the Usk. We'll also give you some stats about what's happening to that species. So 1,700 records in total. Status in both the UK and Wales for dippers is amber, and a UK trend, because we actually haven't got enough information to give you a greater Gwent trend for dipper, not with any statistical certainty anyway. So we'll give you whatever trend we can. We'll also tell you what is happening in terms of protected sites. So whether these records are found on a protected site or not. In the case of dippers, they're actually mostly not on protected sites, but that might be a factor of how accurately people have recorded their record, because most of our rivers are sinks or more, but the designation is very narrow. And so if your grid reference is vague and to even the nearest 10 meters, it might not fall within the sink. So got to take it with a bit of interpretation there, and that will be in the text, so you don't have to sort of make these conclusions for yourself. To give you another example, probably the flip side of it, this is adders, and as you can see, it's a very different picture to the dippers. The maximum number of records for the greens here is only 27. So most of these pale squares, we're talking less than 5 records. In fact, most of them we're talking a single record, to be brutal. We've only got 181 in total. And as you can see, there are a lot more paler squares on this side. So a lot of these records are older, going back into the 80s and 70s. So it's a much more dire picture for our adders. And although I can't give you a trend, again, not enough information to give you a trend, it's not looking great. So again, most are on a, we've got the green there is the non-protected sites, but we have got quite a chunk on triple SIs and sinks. That's mainly because of the Blorange, which is triple SI here, but we've got a nice chunk of records, and Wentwood, which is a sink, where we've got a good chunk of records as well. Where we could, we went into more detail. So with the adders, I did actually look at abundance, because in my research, one of the warnings that was given by the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust was that sites with fewer than 10 individuals as a population were very, very vulnerable to extinction, and would likely go extinct within 10 to 15 years. So I was really keen to try and find records where we had a good number of individuals. I found one. We have one site left that has recorded 10 or more individuals, and that's down at Wentwood. So it's a good pointer to kind of show either we need to get out and get recording more, or there's something quite fundamentally wrong with the way that we're managing for adders, if we're managing at all. Which of those it is, I can't tell you, but it certainly should be a wake-up call to say, look, let's get out here and do something. If you are, if one of the 100 species doesn't appeal to you, or you can't find what you want species wise, what we have done is at the beginning of the report, we've done broad habitats, So this is a map of the woodland cover across Greater Gwent. And next to those maps, you will see a list of species that are associated with that habitat. So if you're interested in a particular habitat, like woodland, grassland, upland, you can look up that habitat. It'll tell you where it is, and it'll also give you pointers to those species. And if you read the brief sections for all those species, you'd probably get an idea of what might be happening in woodland across Greater Gwent. So it's sort of a way of indirectly looking at what's happening in habitat form. We did initially try and look at habitats, but it proved incredibly complicated and time consuming, so we stopped in the end. We also did some group work where we've grouped species together, which can give extra information that you probably wouldn't get from looking at individual species. So this one is absolutely stellar work done by the BTO. And I have to kind of take a moment to kind of celebrate the ornithologists of Gwent. They are awesome. Their data is amazing. Birds and I think 2 mammals were the only species where we could get statistically significant trends. And BTO very kindly actually did the analysis for us. So it's really robust. And what they've done here is they took the farmland species that they had trends for, that we had enough data to get trends for Gwent, and they made us a farmland bird indicator, which is the same as what is used for the UK and Wales as a biodiversity indicator. And they used the same species to create an indicator for Wales so that it was directly comparable. So you can see that both indices are falling sort of quite steadily, really. Ours at a slightly lower level than the national, but both seem to be declining at the same rate, roughly. And this is something that can be repeated and used again over the years. And I mean, going back to the 90s as well, this is pretty outstanding, actually, in terms of data that we can go back that far and have robust data. So this is really super. And we can use that as a kind of general barometer of how well we're doing. This one, again, not a trend, but a diversity index, which helps us to kind of see where important areas could be. So this is the number of species of dragonfly and damselfly, with the purple squares being more species. And I love this because obviously you can see the Gwent levels and Megamarsh shining like a beacon there. You know, being a good area, both for recording and for the diversity, but also patches of the valleys, which most people kind of wouldn't necessarily automatically think, oh, valleys, dragonflies and damselflies, but no, they are absolutely superb. This is sort of Garn Lakes, the top end of Blaenavon, and all the kind of little mine workings and sort of little pools in the middle of the bogs and stuff. And they're not the same species, but it is as diverse as Megamarsh, which is pretty cool. So yeah, more dragonfly work in the valleys, please. Awesome. How am I doing for time? I can't even see my clock. I hope somebody's keeping an eye on me. Another section that we did, and this is a kind of reason to take a lot of these records with a large pinch of salt, is that we have huge biases in our data, absolutely massive. Recorders are fabulous people, but they tend to record where they're going to find nice things. And so we have almost, I think, over 10,000 records in some of the squares at Newport Wetlands, which is, yeah, great, phenomenal. But compared to other parts of Gwent, where, I mean, yes, in my scale, it's less than 2,000, but for many of these squares, it's less than 100. Especially central Monmouthshire, it's really under-recorded there. So you get hotspots of recording. Oh, look, there's Dingerstowe. Oh, there's Pentwyn. this one's here's Cliddock Gorge, which is a great place for butterflies and bats. It's the lesser horseshoe roosts up here. Yes, it's very spatially biased. Equally, we are very biased in the species that we record. Again, the triumph that is Gwent Ornithological Society. Loads of bird records. Hardly anything. I mean, herptiles and fish are virtually invisible there. Tiny slice for fungi. Although the invertebrates looks quite tasty there, a nice big chunk of invertebrates, it's almost, vast majority is butterflies and moths, so our other invertebrates don't get much of a look in. And then vascular plants is our other kind of major recording one. We've got some great botanists who go out and do fabulous things. So yes, it's great for these these taxa, but we could use a little bit more work to even up that pie chart. So you have to be aware that the data is quite skewed. We did do a little analysis of how good we thought the data was for each of the 100. So we did like a subjective sort of, good, medium, bad kind of sort of thought as to whether we thought the data was representing what was happening on the ground. And about a third came out as good. So whilst we do have some absolutely cracking data, it's certainly not for everything, and we've still got a long way to go. So, but as a first attempt, this is the first time we tried to do this, I don't think we did too badly. So moving on, you're probably interested in your woodland, your fields, your woodland. This is behind my house, not that I'm bragging much. So what can you guys do? Onto the fun stuff. The great news is, obviously you've got the State of Nature. We'll link to that and you can dabble in that to your heart's content. There is actually loads available for free for you for that purpose. Starting with Aderyn. Aderyn is the system that is run by the Welsh record centres. So Subrec and Byth and Cofnod and WW Bic. They all work together, as has been said in the questions. They share, so you can send a record to any of them and it'll go to the right place. Equally, you can search anywhere in Wales and you'll get the records, and we don't have cross-border issues, which is really great. We are working, I believe Subrec is working on trying to get the cross-border stuff for the English border working, because obviously we're quite close to the border. For the State of Nature, we actually got our records from the Gloucester and Herefordshire lurks to make sure that we covered the Wye Valley properly. What you can do is run a search. As a member of the public, you don't need to log in, you don't need to pay anything, it's all free, it's all there. So head to Aderyn, and when you've got there, you can run a search of what's in your area, which is on a 1 kilometre square, based on either a postcode or a place, and it will list all the species that aren't sensitive in your area. So sensitive species tend to be things like bat roosts, protected species like dormice. So the kind of things where we don't want people to kind of go poking around, but it will still give you a darn good idea of what's happening in your area, and also how well recorded your area is. So great place to start, really fun to explore. When I did my house, I found out that there were blind cave shrimps in the old mine workings near my house, which I thought was thrilling. The other search you can do from here, as well as doing a what's in your area search, you can look up a species. So if you're particularly keen or on something, or you've seen it in the State of Nature report and you want to kind of delve in a bit deeper and see exactly where those records were, you can run a species search. If it's a sensitive species, you will get this kind of screen, which is a 10-kilometre level. If it's a non-sensitive species, you can actually click on these and it will take you down to the 1-kilometre level. Again, you can look at the records, you can see the date of those records. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I can't drink because I'm fasting. Oh my God. Yeah, so again, a really lovely place to explore, totally free, knock yourselves out. The other place to hunt for records is the NBN Atlas. There is a massive crossover in record storage between NBN and our lurks. But I did think it was worth bringing this up, particularly for those of you who are close to the border, to get hold of your English records. Exactly the same functions are available here that are available on a Darien. So you can do an area search around your field, or you can search for a particular species and see if it's been found near you. Again, really great resource. From both of those sites, you can download if you feel the urge. You can download apps and Excel spreadsheets and things like that. So really cool. This one is not species records based. This is DEFRA's Magic site. This is really useful for looking at protected sites and some habitat distribution as well. So if you come in here and you look for maps, you will find a huge list down the side of different types of protected area. I will share these where to find all this stuff at the end of the presentation. For this, I do apologise as well for the colours. You can't control the colours, which I find is a really unuser-friendly thing that DEFRA has done. The horrible pale green that doesn't show up very well is a triple SI, and I popped the AONBs on as well. But you can toggle on and off to your heart's content, and when you click on a site, it will tell you what it is and why it was designated. So again, really useful to finding out what's happening in your zone. And then finally, another very cool place to look is to look at the history of your area. Really good for finding out where woodlands were, where field boundaries, so hedgerows were. This first one is the Welsh National Library, which is where you will find the tithe maps of Wales. I haven't shown you a screen grab of a tithe map because I wasn't sure what the copyright was, but this is where you search. The other place to search, weirdly, is the National Library of Scotland, who seem to be the lead in historic mapping for the UK. And here you can find stunning maps of what's going on in your zone. So obviously this is Chepstow. Pay attention here. You can see some lovely old field boundaries, some woodlands. When you see a regular spacing of trees like that, that's a traditional orchard. Again, really lovely place to explore and just find out what your area was like. We're super lucky in the UK to have historic mapping. Not many other countries in actually the world have our level of historic mapping. So it's a fantastic resource and it's there for free for the exploring. So grab away. And then finally, same view. Notice how the field boundaries went. Notice how the orchard is somewhere under there, maybe. This is Google Earth. Hopefully you're all familiar with Google Earth. I'm sorry if this is teaching you all to suck eggs, I really am, but I thought I'd go basic. Google Earth has got a historic mapping slider. So this is actually Chepstow in 99. 99, I think they've got back as far as the 80s, but a lot of the 80s imagery isn't very high quality, so you can't really kind of dive down to a site level. But still really useful from a historic perspective, and also to kind of look around your particular site. So you know, are you near a woodland? Can you join onto it? Are you near, I don't know, are there lots of other orchards in your area? Are you near meadows or things like that? Because if you're near to something, you can probably help the wildlife by helping to create similar habitats, because getting our wildlife to move around is key. So yeah, sorry, that was a whistle-stop tour of data sources. I like I said, I will link, I'll either send them to Larry or I'll put them in the chat of where all these things are, so that you can enjoy exploring, because I think curiosity is a wonderful attribute to have if you're a biologist or a conservationist. Finally, a plea. If you cast your mind back to the beginning where I said we have a loop of planning, monitoring, and reviewing, and then changing the cycle of evidence-based conservation. You're probably, I don't want to panic you with the graphs, you're probably monitoring your site already, even unconsciously, because you probably looked in your pond and gone, oh, we've got frog spawn again this year. That's monitoring. That's all it is. For example, I know that if I put peanuts out, then the jay will come. That's monitoring. Okay, I haven't, you know, done anything formal. I'm not planning to encourage or discourage my jay, but that's all it is. These two are examples from State of Nature of single site monitoring results. They're not enough to infer what's happening in Greater Gwent, but they're definitely enough to infer what's happening on those sites. This is dormice numbers at 4 sites in Greater Gwent. Again, pinch of salt with the monitoring, because the standard measure of monitoring dormice is dormice per 50 boxes. I guarantee you that no site in Greater Gwent has 50 dormice boxes. The scheme was designed by people who own vast woodlands in England that can easily accommodate hundreds of boxes. So these swings are exaggerated because it's based on fewer than 50 boxes. So, but I still that there is a downward trend definitely for 2 of those sites. And just for Steve, there's the Greater Horseshoe counts from the National Bat Monitoring Programme, and both of those are looking good. So really great monitoring by the Monmouthshire Bat Group, feeding into a national scheme, and strong protection of both those sites, really close monitoring of both those sites. So they, you know, they're doing really great. Yeah, so I just kind of want to encourage you to kind of think about, okay, what do I have on my site? What do I want to have on my site? And, you know, is what I'm doing having an impact? You don't have to monitor everything. You don't have to look at 100 species. You don't have to do advanced statistics. But if you are looking and going, aha, I do have frog spawn in my pond this year, ping a record to Subrec, ping a record to the National Pond Monitoring Scheme, if you're feeling really keen. And then next year, see if you've got the same again. It's not a huge thing, but if we have enough people doing that kind of thing, it will make an absolutely huge difference. So thank you very, very much, guys. I'm sorry if I've gone on too long. I'm sorry if I've spoken too fast. I'm sorry if I've overwhelmed you with data. That's my I have to put this in blurb about the funding for Gwent State of Nature and all my data sources. I will point out that that's the data sources just for this presentation, not for the whole of the State of Nature, which is about 10 times longer. So I will stop sharing, and I think that the chat is popping up, so I'll
I've added all your links there, Sorrel, so they're all in the chat for everyone.
Oh, have you? Oh, fantastic. Thank you. I was going to need to do that myself. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much for that, Sorrel. That's obviously, I know you put a lot of work in that over 2 years of
Yes.
pouring through thousands and
So
thousands.
did you.
So yeah, so I'd encourage people, if they haven't looked at it already, it's available. It's on various websites, but there's a link to it on our website. So there's 100 stories on there. I quite like the fact there's stories as well. It makes it sound sort of more accessible, and there's success stories, and there's also sort of quite sad stories of things going extinct, really. But it's all important to sort of learn, and it's what we can learn from that and try and reverse the trends of things that are going the wrong way, really. So, and obviously a lot of us are in this meeting sort of landowners, so we've probably got more power to our hands to actually try and reverse some of these declines, and the things that are doing well, make sure they keep on doing well. So now I'm going to see if we've got any questions. We've got oh, here we go, a link to the report there as well. Nice one, Larry. Paula said, very informative, thank you. But
Thanks.
we've got a lack of questions here. Well,
I've overwhelmed everybody. It's too much to process.
There we go. Maybe that means you've covered everything in there, but it's kind of, it's maybe not something maybe you could answer, but it's just, you know, what people can do on their land, really, to sort of turn some of these things around. But it maybe involves people having to have a read of it themselves, and then
I think it's not, I think, although obviously I've just kind of like thrown lots of data at you, it doesn't have to be massively overwhelming. You know, you don't have to record everything.
no,
You know, just pick one thing. Just pick one. Pick your favorite thing, whatever that thing is, and monitor that. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, it could just be the hedgehogs that come visit. You know, are they coming every year? Are they breeding? Because you can hear a hedgehog breeding. You know, things like that. Just knock it into SUBREC. It's very easy to enter records. I mean, even if you're not entering it to SUBREC, you know, stick a note in a notebook, because you'll still be monitoring your own land. And then if something happens to the hedgehogs, you'll notice and you'll go, okay, right, I need to fix something, or I need to kind of, you know, go over to my neighbour who's put slug pellets down or something. Things like that. It does not have to be big. It does not have to be complicated. And if you're monitoring your one thing, then you'll kind of be automatically monitoring everything else, because biology is all connected. So it's fine.
I've got a couple of people asking what SUBREC is. So
that's one for you, Andy.
I probably could do that myself, but Larry's stuck up.
Yes, yeah, Larry's put an answer in the chat. SUBREC.
Yeah, you go.
Sorry, I'll go for it. SUBREC is our local environmental records centre. So the South East Wales Biodiversity Records Centre. Their area is from Monmouthshire, actually all the way to the other side of Glamorgan. So I think they go as far as Swansea way.
Yeah, the gallery at the end of it, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and they go up as far as the Brecon Beacons National Park. They collate thousands of millions of biological records, both current and historic. And they make them available publicly, as you saw on a Derin, but also for people like local authorities, researchers, developers can actually pay to have a search run and get all that information collated for them in an accessible way. So all of our local authorities use SUBREC when they are checking planning applications to look for sensitive species. For example, when you're planning a project, if you're a conservation body, then they'll often run a SUBREC search to see what's there, see what you know, what they need to be thinking about. So it's a really, really valuable resource for conservation. And the data that they're collating will also be fed upwards to Natural Resources Wales, to the JNCC when they're collating national trends. So it's kind of the grassroots level of gathering all this wonderful biological data from everyday recorders, both volunteers, amateurs, and experts who are going out looking at things with a microscope. It all gets kind of sorted and collated, so it can be used for various purposes. So they're an absolutely fantastic organisation. That helps.
Records important because there might be an inclination just to send in like your rare records, that more interesting. No. But if you send in common stuff, your common stuff now might be your rare stuff in 30 years time. So that can give an indication of it's common now, but then if you see an indication of it gradually less and less records of the common stuff every year, then that'll flag up that, oh blimey, that's in trouble, and action can be taken before it gets too late, really. So basically any record, it's all very welcome and all very useful.
Yeah.
And just so you know, all the sites that I've just been out and surveyed lots of your sites, and I've given you the species records for your site. That's all gone to Subrex. So they've got that already, kind of things. That's all being used for conservation.
I just saw a question pop up about recording with kids. Subrec have got loads of resources on their website. They did a lot during lockdown with the homeschooling. So if you visit their website, as Larry's saying in the chat, loads of information on how you can get involved in recording different things, loads of kind of useful guides. If you sign up to their newsletter, they do species of the month, and you can go out hunting for species of the month if you feel so inclined. So yeah, great organisation to get involved in.
They have their square of the month as well. So I think there's some squares which hardly got any records in, so it's a bit of a challenge to sort of say, right, go out to this square, can give you a bit of a focus for your day out. Even like there's hardly any records from here. Let's go there this month and see what we can record there, and it just makes sure there's a whole picture right across Gwent, well, right across southeast Wales, really. But obviously we care more about Gwent here, so there we go. Right, I think if that's all the questions, just thank you very much, Sorrel, for coming along this morning and for putting together the report in the first place.
No worries.
That'll probably need updating in a few years' time. So again.
I hope not.
There we go. I think we have do we have a tea break now? I haven't got my itinerary in front of me.
Yes, tea break now. We've run a little bit over, but if we can all head back in about 5 or 6 minutes, we'll be heading on to Lawrence at 11:40. Right. See you all at 11:40. Enjoy your tea and cake.
Righty-ho, welcome back, everybody. We didn't give you long for your cup of tea there, I'm afraid. But obviously you can be, hopefully you had time to make your cup of tea and you can be drinking it while we have the next talk. So we've got Lawrence from Butterfly Conservation Trust who'll be telling us about their work to save the Shrill Carder Bee, and hopefully it may be stuff you can do on your land as well to help save the Shrill Carder Bee. So Lawrence, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy. And it's the bumblebee conservation, not a butterfly conservation.
Oh, blimey. I did say that. I said the wrong thing. Apologies.
So hi everyone. I'm Lawrence Harris. I'm the Wales project officer at Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Natur and Byth and our project to save the Shrill Carder Bee in Wales. So I'm going to try the screen sharing now. So hopefully that works. Okay, hopefully that's working. Andy, tell me if it's not.
Loaded, good to go.
Yep, go.
Cool, great, thanks. So Natur and Byth is and I know some of you may be aware of it, some of you may not. Natur and Byth is the flagship conservation project for Wales. It's a major initiative, which is a partnership of 9 conservation charities led by Natural Resources Wales and funded by the Lottery Heritage Fund and by the Welsh Government. We're currently in our development phase of the project, and if we're successful with our bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, our delivery phase will start in September 23. I've put all the charities that are a part at the bottom right. Natur and Byth has two core aims that are side by side, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second, but broadly speaking, they are to protect the most endangered species in Wales from extinction, but also to try and engage the public and reconnect the people in Wales with nature. And so the long-term vision for the project is to try to ensure that people across Wales feel like they belong in nature, they can take part in it, they can enjoy it and they care for it, to create a new generation of ambassadors for nature, to strengthen the conservation, environment and land management sector, and to make sure that all of us, land managers, conservationists, and the public can work together to care for nature. And so to do that, a lot of what we're doing is engaging with communities, engaging with stakeholders. So that's a big part of what we're doing over the next 12 to 18 months, is talking to people about Natur and Byth and asking them, actually, how can we make this project work best for you? And in a way, this talk is also that. So if you have any questions about how Natur and Byth can work for you, then I'd love to hear it. So one of the projects within Natur and Byth, and there are 11 projects within Natur and Byth, some of them are single species and some of them are geographic area projects. But one of the projects, and the project which I'm responsible for at Bumblebee Conservation, is the Shrill Carder Bee, saving the Shrill Carder Bee in Wales. The Shrill Carder Bee is probably the UK's rarest and probably the most in decline bumblebee species we have. And it was once very widespread over the south of England and south of Wales, but it's now only found in 5 isolated pockets. One of those is in Kent, one of them is in Somerset, and the other 3 are in South Wales. So one in the South Pembrokeshire, one in Kenfig, Talbot, and one in the Gwent Levels. And of those populations, only the Gwent Levels population is really, we think, relatively strong. The other 2 are in fairly significant decline. And the kind of decline we're talking about is something of the order of 90% since the 1970s. And that decline is primarily due to a loss of habitat. It's due to land management practices that aren't necessarily favourable for the Shrill Carder Bee. One of the things about the Shrill Carder Bee, one of its core defining features, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a second, is that it is a late emerging bumblebee. So it comes out of hibernation around May and is active until October, and that means that a lot of the cutting that's done happens before the end of their active season, which can cause the misuse. The other problem that they're having now is that Shrill Carder Bees are found in just such small isolated pockets that that they're at risk of losing genetic diversity because the populations are isolated from each other. They're effectively inbreeding, and that's causing significant problems and further decline. So just some graphs there side by side to show how that decline's happened from pre-2000 to post 2000. And actually, if we had a graph for 2010, it would show far fewer records now. These graphs just again help illustrate the decline of the bee. So on the graph on the left, the yellow boxes indicate where we had it before 1980, and the red boxes are the post 2000 observations. So again, you can see the decline even within Wales. And this map is just of where we found Shrill Carder bees in the Gwent levels. And again, so the darkest green shows where we've had post 2010 records, and the lighter shades show older records. So again, you can see that contraction in the population to just some small isolated pockets, and it should give you an idea of quite what the decline is like for the Shrill Carder bee, but also quite how widespread it is across the entire Gwent levels region. So this is not an ID session, but I thought it might be interesting just to talk about how you spot a Shrill Carder bee. Shrill Carder bees are probably of all the rare bees the easiest to identify. They're quite small. They have this straw yellow colouring and this really distinct and identifiable black band between the wing bases. And you know, some other features there that you can use to identify it. Again, that's how it gets its name. It's shrill. It's a high-pitched buzz. It's slightly higher pitched than many of the bumblebees you might be used to. But that black band is really what you're looking for, and so it's relatively hard to confuse with the other bumblebees out there. I've put this in just because the life cycle of a Shrill Carder bee is incredibly important to its conservation. And that's because when it emerges, which is late spring, you've got this forage gap. The list of available plants is fairly slim. So if you put some plants out in May, you are very likely to attract a Shrill Carder bee queen because it is scarce on the ground for them. And you can just see here how that cycle works. The nests tend to be established in June to July, and you start getting a few workers who feed on the clovers and the vetchling and the yellow rattle. And then through August through September, which again is when a lot of the cutting takes place, the bees are at their most abundant and their colonies are growing, and then you start getting the males appearing and the new queens. So that's when it starts to become important for mating. And the colonies tend to die off around October time, which is a bit later than all the other rare bees. Nesting is something that's often overlooked because we always think about forage. We always think about, right, where are the flowers, where are they going to get the pollen and the nectar from? But particularly for Shrill Carder bees, they don't travel very far from the nest to forage. We call them doorstep foragers. So you're looking at a range of maybe 200 meters or so, which means that they need to have nesting habitat close to wherever we have those wildflowers. And so the kind of nesting habitat we're talking about is tussocky grassland, just below the surface. They nest very close to the surface, and because of that, they're very vulnerable to disturbance from activity, from land activities. They tend to like a sloping bank, something south facing and warm, an old rodent nest or a small hollow in the ground. We rarely ever find a Shrill Carder bee nest. So if you ever come across one, it will be a fantastic observation for us, because we're always looking for more. But again, so that nesting habitat is incredibly important when we're thinking about conservation and we're thinking about how to manage land for Shrill Carder bees. I've already said all that. Okay, so I thought I'd just talk very quickly about the kind of plants and flowers that are useful to the Shrill Carder bee. The pea family is right up there in terms of its importance, not just to the Shrill Carder bee, but to all bumblebees. The pollen's incredibly protein rich, and across the Gwent levels, and particularly the Newport wetlands, you've got several of these quite prevalent, particularly narrow everlasting pea. Legume-rich habitats are just so vital for the Shrill Carder bee, and so the more of these we have, the better they'll do. Meadow vetchling, another really important one in this family because it flowers that bit earlier, and it helps fill that gap. And it's found on a lot of the Gwent levels. Meadow vetchling is also an incredibly important forage plant for the longhorned bee, which is a solitary bee, and that really identifiable one with those really long horns sticking out. I don't have a photo. I wish I did. So the pea family, legumes, really, really critical. So then we've got the family, and so these tend to be those that are found on woodland edges, hedgerow edges, and they again are really, really important in the spring when there can be a bit of a forage gap. And wide, if you have a nice wide hedgerow margin, you can get lots and lots of these dead nettles, but complemented with that tussocky grassland. And that combination is ideal Shrill Carder Bee habitat because they've got the tussocky grassland to nest in, and these dead nettles right when they need the food the most, right outside the doorstep of the nest. So self-heal, bugle, hedge woundwort, betony, marsh woundwort, all incredibly vital species here. So again, Shrill Carder Bees love a daisy. They love the daisy family. Daisies are I think they're the biggest plant family in the UK. And so even though I think experience shows that Shrill Carder Bees tend to prefer the slightly more complicated flower heads with the lots of florets like you might see in the legume families, they love a knapweed. And knapweed flowers late summer. So it's a nice late season one to see that you'll often see a Shrill Carder Bee sitting on. Ragwort and so dandelion again. Dandelion's an important spring forage plant. So often a tendency to mow places where there are dandelions in spring, and sometimes that's not helpful to the Shrill Carder Bees. They love the thistles, often found again in those hedge habitats. And so because the daisy family, because the Asteraceae flower in later in the summer, quite often you often see the Shrill Carder Bee males sitting on them, basking in the sun. All the males really do is like to find a nice flower to sit on in the sun, bask there, and they don't really have any work to do. Find a female, go back and bask on their flower. So you'll often see them just sitting around on the daisy family in later in the summer. And so finally, the broom rapes and the borages. Yellow rattle, incredibly important plant for queens when they come out in spring. So is red bartzia. Red bartzia is important, obviously, later in the year because it flowers in August and September. And so really with red bartzia or yellow rattle, anything a landowner can do to increase the prevalence of these species, the better it will be for saving Shrill Carder Bees. Red bartzia, of course, prefers slightly more disturbed ground, so you often see it around tracks, gateways, and so it's best not to cut it when it's in flower. So again, I can't encourage enough the sowing of or the avoidance of cutting of yellow rattles and red bartzia. I want to talk about a few case studies of Shrill Carder Bee conservation. And the reason I've included these case studies, even though most of mine are we've had a successful project out in Kent, which is one of the key Shrill Carder Bee populations, and some of these habitats are quite important, and some of these case studies are relatively interesting. So I hope you don't mind me talking about a few English examples. So this is Rake Hill, which is owned by the Canterbury City Council and managed in partnership with the Kent Wildlife Trust. And it's got a mix of unimproved neutral grasslands, blocks and patches of scrub. It's made of a number of compartments, which each have distinctive characteristics and a range of different sward compositions. And there's dense scrub on site, which actually is very helpful for a number of populations of nightingales and warbirds. And so this site is managed by grazing, so it's managed by hardy ponies and native cattle breeds, which are grazed at very low stocking densities in isolation on different areas year round. And there's also some scrub management on rotation to prevent loss of grassland area. And so as a result of the lack of agricultural improvements, so there's no artificial fertilizer and only the lower density grazing, the swards here are incredibly herb rich and full of Shrill Carder Bee ideal plants, legume-rich areas full of red clover, birdsfoot trefoil, the meadow vetchling. In some areas are providing abundant knapweeds and various yellow composites for late season forage. And that low level disturbance also means that there's abundant nesting habitats throughout the colony, and as well as there being Shrill Carder Bee on this site, there's also a couple of other rare bees, and the brown banded carder bee and the ruderal bumblebee. So this is a pretty good example of how to do it to look after the Shrill Carder. Another Kent example, and this is Ellendon Farm, and it's about 70 hectares, I think, arable and grassland. So the land was taken out of arable production because of heavy clay soils that made it difficult to farm, and so it was entered into a whole farm, the first whole farm agri-environmental agreement. So there's significant areas of wildflowers sown, a sunflower plot, native hedgerow, which are lightly managed to control the blackthorn, legume, rich pollen and nectar mixes, and restoration of species-rich grassland, and management of existing species-rich grassland across the site. And they've also sown the autumn-sown bumblebird mix, which is good for seed-eating birds and the pollen and nectar for the pollinators. And there's a range of flower-rich margins, cultivated strips and grass buffer strips, which are again sown with those tussocky grasslands to provide the nesting habitat as well. And we've had Shrill Carder Bees recorded on the site now for 3 years, and there are also brown-banded Carder Bees and the ruderal bees. And Shrill Carders are regularly seen foraging across those legume-rich agricultural mixes, so the trefoils and the white clover and the red clover. And also they do like the sunflowers in late summer. And very relevant for Gwent, we've got the seawall habitat, and vegetated seawalls can provide some of the richest assemblages of flora for bumblebees. And they interact with the adjacent habitats. They interact with reens and ditches and lagoons, and they increase the capacity of the landscape to support biodiversity. And more often than not, the seawalls can represent the largest expanse of unimproved grassland in the area. And they also provide this connectivity, so they can connect isolated populations of various species, including bees. And so it's probably important for me to highlight the differences between the seawalls in Kent, where we've had incredible success in bumblebee conservation, and the seawalls in Gwent. And in Kent they are all south facing, whereas in Gwent they're north facing, and they are much steeper. So north facing slopes, they can be flowery if they're not and they do tend to be more in the shade, but they can be flowery, they can be rich, and they can be visited by bumblebees, but they are harder to graze, and they are much harder to mow. And I know that NRW is currently trialing some kind of robo mower system. But the key with seawalls is to do it in sections, so not to cut it all in the middle of July, and to try and have a rotation, and to also leave uncut refuges as nesting habitats. But there is a lot of work going on right now to think about how the seawalls across the Gwent levels can be optimally managed for conservation, and how to use them most effectively. And finally, I do have a Welsh example. This is Hazel Farm. So Hazel Farm was a species poor, semi-improved pasture, which was oversown in wildflower seed in 2020. And the farmer's managing it as a hay meadow, but it's trying to leave uncut margins along a stream, and it's grazed by sheep in the winter. And so last year we did record Shrill Carder Bees there as well. So just another example of how this can be effectively done. So these are, I'm sure many of you have come across some of these suggestions before, but these are the critical management suggestions if you're going to try and encourage Shrill Carder Bee populations on site. So ensuring that flower-rich forage is available right through the period of Shrill Carder Bee activity, particularly given that late cycle of the Shrill Carder Bee, and that a lot of cutting will take place before they stop their activity in late September and October. To cut the traditionally managed hay meadows after mid-July, and to do those rotations where possible to provide that forage into September, leaving those wide uncut margins, and rotating each year, and to avoid summer grazing where possible, or use a light rotational grazing pattern. The usual stuff you would find for pollinators, but recognizing that late forage is important. And the most important thing when managing habitat for Shrill Carder bees is to ensure there is that abundance of flowers available right through the flight season and within the proximity of potential nesting habitats, so within the proximity of that tussocky grassland. So rotating the cutting of hedges, ditch edges and banks, enhancing the existing swards and establishing new wildflower grasslands and nectar margins, leaving that tussocky grassland undisturbed for nesting, and particularly through their activity period until October, and some advice there on protecting and managing open brownfield habitats to maintain that mosaic, and it's really beneficial for all bumblebees and the majority of pollinators to have almost a patchwork of habitats across the site. So instead of one big area of grassland and then grazing the rest intensively, it's better to have patches that add up to the same amount of area but spread across the site. One other tool that's available for Shrill Carder bees is early cutting. So it's possible to do an early cut in June, probably, and have lots of legumes, etc., that will then start again and flower later in the year, providing that later season forage. Of course, there is a risk with that, and it's really important if you're doing an early cut to not disturb areas with orchids, ground nesting birds, etc. So that's probably the majority of what I have to say. I think what I'd also like to add is that if you're a landowner in the Gwent Levels and you've got Shrill Carder Bee records on site or nearby, we'll almost certainly be in touch with you over the coming few months to discuss how we can work together to help preserve those habitats. And we're going to try very hard to sign you up to be part of Natur and Byth, and to work to monitor those populations and provide the advice that you might need to help the Shrill Carder bees not go extinct, because that is a really real possibility here that they go extinct in Wales. And I'd also repeat what I said at the beginning, which is that Natur and Byth is a very collaborative effort, and we want to make this a partnership with landowners. So we want to ask you, what do you need from Natur and Byth? How can we use the resources we have and use this project, which is a multi-year project, significant in scale, to benefit you as well as benefiting the wildlife and the endangered species on your land. So that's me. So thank you, and I guess I'll take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Lawrence. That was great. I particularly liked seeing all the flower-rich meadows. It made me long for the summer, to be honest. Lovely seeing all that. We've got a few queries here. I'm just going to get the chat up. There we go. There's someone who lives in North Monmouthshire asking, would they extend from the Gwent Levels towards them? They've got suitable habitat, but would they ever make it? That was the kind of question I was going to ask as well, really, because I know our local wildlife areas are spread all across Gwent, and I can think of loads of sites full of wildflowers, which I'm sure the Shrill Carder bees would be happy in, but would they ever make it there?
Yeah, so there are a number of observations that are fairly recent in further north and further inland. They are sparse and they are scattered here and there. Sort of, I think there are probably about 5 or 6 just to the north of the Gwent Levels and outside that region, and they do make it there. They can make it there. It just depends on the connectivity of the habitat and whether there's the pathways for them to follow. So they do exist there, and it is always worth managing habitat for them, because actually anything you do for a Shrill Carder bee will be beneficial to all of the rare bumblebees, basically. Yeah,
I think there's 7 rare bumblebees that are being sort of studied, and certainly some of them will be further inland, I would imagine. So obviously any bumblebee, any sort of insect is good managing for. But I sort of wondered whether there's any thought about sort of reintroducing them to sites. If you think there's a lovely interconnected, lots of meadows and everything, but it may take them a long time to get there, would there ever be any sort of consideration of doing that?
It's always something that we're thinking about. It's always something that's on the mind. Reintroductions of bumblebees have always been fairly tricky to do. Of course, we've been trying very hard for a number of years to reintroduce the short-haired bumblebee to the UK, and it's been relatively difficult. And actually, the priority right now is, can we save it in the sites that it is in? It has 3 places which are good for it. It's happy there, and if we can preserve those sites, if we can get it to not go extinct, I think that's probably the priority for the time being. And then we can think about how do we interconnect habitat in a way that allows it to spread. We'd much rather do that than try and do some introduction or let it or once it's gone extinct.
Asking, are wasps a threat to the Shrill Carder Bee?
You're asking me a question that I don't know the answer to. They're not a major threat. They're not one of the things that we think, right, this is a core cause of the Shrill Carder Bee's decline. I would have to ask somebody to see if there's any particular parasitic wasps, etc., that are a particular risk to the Shrill Carder. But the main threats, to be honest with you, are habitat loss and I guess pesticide use as well, as is common for all bumblebees.
There's quite similar. The other one, someone else is in Monmouthshire. We have 2.5 acres that fits the criteria sort of perfectly. Could they expect Shrill Carder Bees? I guess you've sort of covered that. They may make it there, and it's worth managing in that way. Yeah,
and if you just give me 1 second, if you just look at this, is a graph of Monmouthshire and all of the most recent records of Shrill Carder, so all of the records of Shrill Carder Bees. So the ones with a red dot in the middle are where we've had a record after the year 2000, so where it's more likely than not to be at the moment. So that should give you an idea of quite how spread it is and how isolated those inland pockets are.
The odd one is making it further north, so they could turn. I think the furthest one north is at our ERC in Ebbw Vale, I think, where it's a long way from anywhere else, but one turned up there. So if they can get all the way to Ebbw Vale, then there's potential.
If there's the habitat.
Yeah. I guess that's the message. Keep your land really nice for them. But I know, like, a lot of people have hay meadows, and there's some, as you sort of mentioned, there's some contradiction between the traditional management of hay meadow and making sure there's enough flowers there into the autumn for the Shrill Carder Bees. Yeah, there definitely is. And it depends how much land you have available to do this stuff. Yeah. But having some available for the Shrill Carder Bee is going to be really, really helpful. Yeah, so I guess big wide margins is the way. And if you have got lots of fields, rotation, and there's always some forage at the right time of year. Right. Yeah. Here. The Wye Valley A&B have adopted the Shrill Carder Bee as one of our priority species for wider landscape conservation action. Aside from improved habitat management, what else can be done to help this species? Are there any bumblebee monitoring schemes that we could encourage? Well, yeah, I mean, yes. I think clearly the habitat. So as with all bumblebees, the reality is that the only conservation intervention that works is giving them the space to live. Once they have the habitat, they'll take care of themselves. So, but monitoring is going to be so important for us, and there are a number of initiatives for monitoring bumblebees. There's the Bee Walk program, which I'm sure you're aware of. But actually, perhaps it'd be useful if I got in touch with you afterwards and we just discuss how we can potentially work together on that, because Bumblebee Conservation Trust would absolutely love to partner with you on that and see how we can help. Yeah, well, certainly we've got our band of volunteers, and I think that would be one of the more popular volunteer activities if people can go out for a nice walk somewhere flowery in the summer and record bees. So yeah. Certainly. There we go. Is anyone looking at wildlife corridors across our region, e.g. connecting landowners together? I know there were some bee lines that were, you can probably explain them better and other stuff. Yeah, I mean, but Buglife have their Beelines program, which is about doing exactly that, and those beelines do exist in the Gwent area, and it's also something that we're looking at as well. So when we look at these maps of sites, one of the exercises we're doing right now is thinking, look, this is where Shrill Carder Bee habitat is at the moment. How can we create that? How can we take the areas where we've got good population density, use those as hubs, and try and connect those those spokes, those pathways between those hubs to try and allow them to spread, because actually that's so incredibly important for managing that genetic diversity problem.
that I mentioned earlier. So that is definitely something that we're looking at and is going to be really important.
We've got our great trusted meadows reserve down on the levels, which the management plan for that at the moment. It's something outside of this meeting, but we're doing our management plan at the moment. So obviously we could sort of coordinate on that and get our management right for Shrill Carder Bees. I'm sure that'll make it right for lots of others.
Absolutely.
Could even be like an exemplar kind of site that people could, visit and see what we're doing. So that'd all be good. Oh, there we go. Sorrel said Shrill Carders is one of the 100 stories in the Greater Gwent State of Nature report, and also the beelines information's in there as well. So it's all in there. So there we go. If there's any,
I have a question.
Oh, go for it.
It's me. I was just going to ask, in terms of all the questions about whether they might make it north of the Gwent levels, is there existing any sort of habitat connectivity mapping that members of the public can look at, where you have already mapped where you think Shrill Carders might go next in terms of linked habitat, so that people can start to keep a lookout really in key areas? Because I live just north of the Gwent levels really, and there's some lovely little sink sites like 10 minutes from my home that I would be, very interested in going and trying to hunt them if it's a possibility.
Don't have that, but it's a really good idea, and I'm going to add it to my list of things to do.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're going to leave here with more work to do, but that's all.
I know, and it's Sunday, God.
Right, I think if that's all the questions, then thank you very much, Lawrence. That was great. And I think we're quite privileged here in Gwent to have the Shrill Carder Bee, so we certainly don't want to lose them. So
great. Thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right. Hello there, Kat. Right, it's Kat from Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, and she'll be chatting to us about the pine marten reintroduction. And I think they're making their way over to us. So
yeah, hi everyone. From one fuzzy thing that needs connected landscapes to something slightly larger that also needs connected landscapes. Can you see the screen that I'm sharing there?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so as Andy says, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the pine marten reintroduction that we've been running in Gloucestershire. But obviously pine martens don't really abide by county boundaries, so they are in many of the surrounding counties already. So I'm just going to give you a bit of background about pine martens and the project and how they actually made it to the Forest of Dean and what we're doing to really monitor that population. So pine martens, just as a little bit of background, they're part of the mustelid group. Mustela in Latin means weasel, and pine martens all have this similar body style. So they're kind of basically long furry tubes with short legs and quite small rounded heads and small ears. There are over 50 different species of mustelids worldwide, but we have 6 native species here. So we have the pine marten, we have weasels, stoats, polecats, otters, and badgers. And we do also have one invasive species, which is the American mink. But today we're obviously focusing on martens, and the pine marten, the European pine marten, sits in this group called the Martes complex. And we get martens from North America all the way down to Southeast Asia. They come in different colors and sizes, so there's something there for everyone's taste. But the European pine marten, that one in the middle, is the one that we find in the UK and in Europe. So pine martens, as the name suggests, although it is quite misleading, pine martens are arboreal mustelids. They have adaptations like retractable claws, which enable them to climb trees really effectively. They tend to den in trees, in squirrel drays or natural cavities. So they really do live off the ground, as opposed to some mustelids, which you might see climbing a tree just to get at some food. They actually do live in the canopy quite a lot. But as the name suggests, or it misleads you, they are not pine woodland specific. So we find pine martens in all sorts of habitats, but it's likely that the name pine marten was kind of given because they were pushed into these conifery habitats when the population declined. But we'll find them in all sorts of woodland structures and ages. They really prefer habitat mosaics. So what I mean by this is woodland areas of different ages and species, but open areas as well. So rank grassland to forage in. You'll find them in heathery areas, tussocky grassland, fringe habitats, orchards. So they really like this mixed bag of habitats where they can forage and den and move through the environment. Their diet is super varied. They are omnivores, so they eat all sorts of things. Generally in the UK, their diet is about 50 to 60% voles or small mammals. So preferentially field voles, but they will also eat wood mice and bank voles. The other 40% or so of their diet is really made up of whatever is locally or seasonally abundant. So, for example, in the summer, we find martens eat a lot of beetles and insects. Going into the autumn, they'll eat a lot of berries. And in the winter, they might eat small birds, or occasionally they will also predate squirrels. So their diet is really varied, and I suppose slightly similar to a fox's, but on a smaller scale. For animals of this size, they only weigh about 2 kilos. They are relatively long-lived, so if they make it past that kind of carnivore 2-year they die phase, they can live up to 9 or 10 years old in the wild, and in captivity they've been known to live up to 20 years. So as a result of this relatively long-lived life strategy, they kind of take things easy and they have quite a low reproductive rate, so they might not be reproductively active until they're about 3 years old. If they do breed, they might not breed every year. And if they do reproduce, they might only have 3 or 4 kits in a litter. And if they do have 3 or 4 kits, maybe only one of them will survive into adulthood. So the growth of pine marten populations is really slow. They're sensitive little souls, and they do take a long time to build in number. They were once found all across the UK. They were widespread, but they weren't common. So we did find them in places, but not in high numbers. But their numbers really declined, and by the early 1900s, the pine marten population was struggling quite a lot. So even in the 1960s, as you can see from this map, there were little patchy populations, but the majority of that population had actually been forced up into, or had retracted up into the north of Scotland. And this is mainly due to predator control, which was then exacerbated by habitat fragmentation. So lots of trees were felled, and that meant that any little populations that were left weren't able to intermix, and they gradually just fizzled out. In the 1980s, lots of our wildlife was protected by the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which has been hugely beneficial for the recovery of various bird and mammal species in the UK. And pine martens are one of the species that really show a recovery since the 1980s. And we can see from around the last 10 years that the pine marten population has now got a really strong base in Scotland, and it's moving not just in the north of Scotland, but it's moving all the way down through Scotland, even across the central belt where we've got Edinburgh and Glasgow, and into the Scottish borders. We're getting lots of sightings now in the north of England, as well as these little residual populations popping up across England and Wales. Some of them potentially are residual populations, some of them may be covert releases or kind of pine martens being chucked out the back of someone's car. However, what it shows is that pine martens can still thrive in these habitats. They just need the connectivity and the larger bulk of the population to reach these areas. So it is looking really positive for pine martens, and particularly in Scotland. So why are we interested in restoring the population? It looks like it's doing all right in Scotland. I'm sure many of you will have seen articles and been involved in discussions about the fact that we're going through a massive phase of biodiversity loss. And it's really important that we try to maintain species that we still have in this country. We don't want to get to a point where we're having to bring pine martens over from the continent to kind of reinvigor the population that we had here that was completely lost. So we really have to kind of look after what we've got. Pine martens are also a fantastic indicator species. So because of this habitat mosaic preference and this really varied diet, if you have a pine marten present, it suggests you have lots of different habitat types available. You have lots of different food resources available. So it's likely that wherever the pine marten is, there are lots of other species thriving there as well. Although they are recovering in Scotland, their natural recovery is really slow because of this really kind of slow life strategy. And it's unlikely that that population in Scotland will ever naturally recover in England and Wales. And so really at this point, conservationists decided, okay, I think we might need to intervene to give this pine marten population a bit of a helping hand to reach some of these original ranges. There's also a lot of interest and therefore a lot of funding for pine marten reintroductions because of the potential impacts they could have on grey squirrels. A lot of us suffer tree damage because of grey squirrels, which is detrimental not only to timber production, but also the health of the trees. So if pine martens could be part of that toolkit in managing that grey squirrel population, then it could be of great interest that these species recover. However, this field and this area of research is still very much in its early days. So we're still waiting to see what happens as pine martens recover, as to whether their impacts on grey squirrels are as great as we kind of hope they're going to be. So where did we decide to release pine martens? Some of you may have heard of a reintroduction that was undertaken in mid-Wales. And this was really a result of a whole England and Wales study, which looked at where good potential sites for releasing pine martens would be. Vincent Wildlife Trust, who are a mammal conservation organisation that focus on any kind of UK mammal and area, they undertook this study, and they actually found that, well, they looked for areas that were really associated with pine marten presence, that, you know, if you had this kind of habitat, you'd probably find pine martens. So that's areas of broadleaf woodland, woodland scrub and natural grassland, so that nice mosaic habitat. And actually, mid-Wales, or Wales in general, had the best sites. There were about 4 or 5 locations across Wales which looked like they had really great potential to support pine marten populations, and you can see them indicated on this map on the right-hand side. The Forest of Dean was also flagged up as an excellent site, and actually of all the sites, it had the highest proportion of broadleaf woodland. Broadleaf woodland is really great because you have a larger age category of trees, because they're not just grown for timber. There's a lot of ancient woodland left in the Forest of Dean, which provides these natural cavities for pine martens. But Vincent Wildlife Trust decided, right, we'll hedge our bets and we'll actually reintroduce pine martens into the middle of Wales. It gives them the opportunity to travel north into appropriate habitat, as well as south. So that reintroduction was undertaken in 2015 to 2018, and about 52 animals were released. That population's doing really well. It's breeding every year, and it's expanding all across Wales as we speak. But while that translocation was happening, Forestry England and Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust said, well, why don't we look at the Forest of Dean? It's likely that the pine martens from the Welsh reintroduction will get there eventually, but it'd be really beneficial if we created a bolstering population in the Forest of Dean, so that as the Welsh population expanded, it could then join up with this Forest of Dean population and create a more resilient landscape scale population. So the Forest of Dean and Wye Valley, which is mapped on the left here, that big green blob is the main Forest of Dean block. It provided about 170 square kilometres of really suitable habitat for pine martens to be reintroduced into, with the core area, that main block of the Forest of Dean, being about 80 square kilometres. So in terms of pine martens and pine martens territories, that could hold about this really random number, which is 0.2 to 0.5 martens per kilometre squared. But that's roughly a pine marten territory of 5 square kilometres. So you can actually cram about 35 pine martens into that block if they were all in 5 kilometre squared territories, which is actually kind of an average territory size of a pine marten. Their territories can range from about 2 square kilometres up to 22 square kilometres. It really depends on the quality of the habitat and the density of pine martens in that area. So they're really adaptable and really influenced by what's available in that landscape. And the best thing about the Forest of Dean reintroduction location was that the Welsh population was predicted to arrive here within about 15 to 20 years, at which point the populations would be indistinguishable. So at the moment, we are seeing individual animals crossing paths from both projects, but on a population scale, we envisage that in about 15 years, we won't be able to tell the difference between martens that have been introduced in the Forest of Dean and those that have been introduced near Aberystwyth. So we had to take a lot of things into consideration before we release an animal. It's not a kind of drive them down, chuck them out the back of the car kind of situation. We had to make sure that we've considered all possibilities for the survival of that animal, but also for the resilience and survival of the landscape that we're bringing them to. So we looked at food availability. Pine martens love their small mammals. Forest of Dean is full of them. So that's a big tick. We have to also take into consideration things that might predate pine martens. We don't want to bring lots of animals down for them then to be eaten by their main predator, which is the fox. The Forest of Dean actually has quite a low fox density relative to the rest of the UK. So that's another big tick in the location box. For those of you that are very familiar with the area, you will know that there are a lot of roads that run through the Forest of Dean. It's a very accessible woodland. The forest comes right up to the edge of the roads, and they're very fast roads. As a result, we see lots of road traffic accidents with deer and boar. And it was a big concern that pine martens would be another victim of that high speed busy roads. However, the density of the road networks here is actually really comparable to in the Netherlands, where there's a really healthy pine marten population. So although we flagged it as a risk, we thought, well, we'll bring the first group of martens down. If we have a lot of road traffic accidents, we'll maybe approach a different strategy or not bring any more martens here, but we'll adapt depending on the mortality that we have. The other concern was predation concerns. So what would pine martens eat that's in this area that might be a kind of a negative knock-on effect? And that includes you know, species that are found down here that we don't have in Scotland, but particularly poultry and game birds were of slight concern. So we undertook some mitigation work to ensure that people were informed about the ecology and the behaviour of pine martens, and also any predator exclusion work that we could do. We tried to undertake that as best possible before the pine martens arrived. So although the ecology of the site that pine martens are being released in is important, the social acceptability and the willingness of local communities to accept the reintroduction of pine martens was also a really important part of this project. So we did 2 stakeholder feasibility studies. This is basically consulting anyone who might be impacted by the release of pine martens. We found that there was high public support for the translocation, and we also spoke to people about how they wanted to be engaged in the project, how they wanted to be involved when the pine marten reintroduction was happening. Lots of people really favoured seeing and supporting the project. Now, that's great. Pine martens are really elusive, and so it's a real challenge to provide pine martens for people to see. Having worked on pine martens for 7 years, I've only ever seen 2 in the wild. So it is a challenge to be able to engage with communities in that way. However, it's really informed the way that we work with lots of communities. We do camera trap loan schemes, so people can actually see pine martens on camera in their local area. So thinking about some of those risks or the impacts that pine martens had, we spent a lot of time working with lots of other organisations who are experts in these fields to reduce the impacts that pine martens might have. That includes protecting some maternity roost sites of the greater and lesser horseshoe bat population, which is a fantastic population that we have in this area. And we're continuing to monitor some of these underground sites that the martens, that the bats use regularly. We're really interested in the impact pine martens might have on grey squirrels because of the tree damage that I spoke about earlier. So we're monitoring grey squirrels every year in the Forest of Dean, so we can get a bit of a baseline idea of our grey squirrel population, which we hope we can then review in 10 years' time and see a positive impact that pine martens might have had on those numbers. We're also working with RSPB. There are lots of nest box or nesting bird populations in the area. So we've installed predator proofing devices on some of the nest boxes to see if they have any impact, if we do have any pine marten predation events, etc. And we've also worked with BASC and some of the gamekeeping organisations to inform people about how to best protect their game birds and protect their poultry, and also just a little bit about pine marten ecology and their behaviour. So there's a clearer understanding of any risks that these animals pose and how to mitigate against them. So once we've established all of the kind of ways and means to get the martens here, we actually have to find some and bring them here. So the first thing that we had to do is go up to Scotland into the belly of the pine marten population, not from the fringes where the population's still recovering, but right up to Inverness-shire, where there's a really, really strong pine marten population. And what we do is we survey lots of different woodlands for pine marten scat, pine marten poo. This gives us a really good idea of pine marten density in those woodlands. So we can then apply for licenses to trap wild caught animals and translocate them down to Gloucestershire. So once we've selected those sites in the spring, we return there to the north of Scotland in the summer, early autumn, after pine martens have bred, after their young are now independent. So we might be trapping potentially pregnant females in the August, September of the year. So we go up to these woodland sites, about 6 different sites, so we're not trapping lots of related animals, and we start baiting them. We bait all of the sites with what we call sticky mix, which is this lovely mixture in the middle. It's a combination of peanuts, raisins and jam. I prefer strawberry jam because it tastes nicer, but whatever the jam is, they prefer the sugariest, cheapest jam that's available. Pine martens have a really sweet tooth, and they're a sucker for an egg. They love eggs. They usually come for the jam and then stay for the eggs. That's generally what they do. So we bait the sites for a couple of weeks, then we put traps out, and we have one night to trap as many martens as we can to translocate them down to Gloucestershire. So what we hope for is the next day we've got a little pine marten sitting in the trap, ready to be taken in and assessed for translocation. We might trap 1 pine marten out of 20 traps. We might trap 10 pine martens. We just have no idea. And so we take every single animal into our really professional processing facility, which is the garage of the Airbnb that we're staying in. It is an upgrade from the mouldy static caravan that we have had before. And each pine marten is taken in for a health check. We will only translocate healthy adult individuals. So the animals are lightly anaesthetized. And we basically run them through all the same checks. So first of all, we'll weigh them. Male martens are slightly heavier than females, although visually it's quite hard to tell the difference by just looking at them in a trap. We then assess them for age. So we don't want to translocate juvenile individuals. Young animals tend to have it kind of in their nature to disperse away from an area. And we want animals that are going to stay where they're put. And so adult animals are slightly better on that front. It also proves that we also want to take animals that have potentially bred before to prove that they're fertile. The last thing we want to do is translocate infertile individuals because it doesn't really increase our chances of that population expanding. So if you look at the top left animal, it's got really white, sharp teeth. That suggests a young animal. It's actually got a snapped canine, but generally that's a really good animal to translocate. The bottom left animal with stumpy teeth looks like he's gone through a few wars. He's not a good candidate for translocation, so he would be re-released. So that's how we age them, but then we also can identify pine martens individually because they have different bib patterns. So just like stripes on a tiger or spots on a leopard, each individual is different. So we take really clear reference shots. So when we camera trap these animals later in the year, we can tell who's who just by visually assessing them. We then accessorize our animals. So we put radio tracking collars on each of them. These radio tracking collars are made of horse bridle leather. So they're designed to stretch and wear off over time. So they'll fall off after about 6 to 8 months following the release of the animal. But what that lets us do is we can monitor all of the pine martens to check, A, they're still alive. We don't want them to have been hit by cars, but if they are, we can find them. It also lets us know if they're still in the release site. If they're not, we can still track them and find out where they've established territories, because that's really what we want to know is where they are and are they settled, with the main aim of them staying as near to the release area as possible. Any animals that aren't suitable for translocation, they're released at the exact point that they were trapped, so back into their own territory, and we won't retrap that animal, we won't retrap that site again. So once we've got all our animals processed, they've all got collars on, they've all come around from their anaesthetic, we then wait till it's evening and we drive all the way down from near Inverness to the Forest of Dean. We do that drive overnight for a few reasons. So sometimes in August, it's actually quite hot and we don't want the animals to overheat in the vehicle while we're translocating them. It also means the road's quieter, so the drive is faster. But the pine martens then arrive in the Forest of Dean when it's still dark. So it's a bit calmer for the animals. We want to reduce the stress on the martens as much as possible. The less stressed they are, the better their chance of not running as far away as possible from the release site once they're released. So we drive them all the way down to the Forest of Dean, and each animal is put in its own soft release pen. So soft release means basically it's a phased release process. A hard release would be you drive them down, you throw them out the back of the van. Whereas a soft release, they're put into these enclosures, which are about 3 by 3 by 3 meters in size, and they're vegetated inside. They're provided with food, and they stay there for a few days to basically acclimatize, and their stress levels come back down to a normal level. So we translocate about 4 animals every 4 days, and they go from being wild in Scotland to into their release pen in the Forest of Dean in less than 24 hours. They then stay in these release pens for about 5 days, at which point we then open the door and let them go. So while they're in this release pen, they're provided with as much food as they could want. There's eggs hidden around the pen for them to find if they want them. A lot of them will then stash these eggs in their den boxes, which is this big black box in the background that you see here. I then have to clean out moldy eggs once we've released them. But generally, they're quite content in these pens, and they're cladded with lots of pine and tree branches to make them feel quite secure. There's camera traps inside these release pens to allow us to monitor their behaviour, to make sure that collar's still on. We don't want the animals to be showing any signs of stress or disease, at which point we'd have to intervene and potentially not release that animal. But they're quite content in these enclosures. And then on the final night, we just leave the door open and the animals will leave of their own accord. Sometimes it takes them quite a few hours to realise the door is open. Sometimes they don't realise the door is open and they won't leave until the next day. But generally, the pine marten will leave the pen and not come back. We do continue to provide food at the pen in case the animal can't find its own food sources, but we've never had an occurrence of an animal coming back into that pen once it's been released. All of these animals are solitary, so they all have their own separate release pen, and all of the pens are quite far away from each other, so there's not kind of any forced social interactions between these animals. So once we let our pine martens go, we've released 35 in total over the last 3 years in the Forest of Dean. There are 4 main things that we want to make sure of. One, we don't want to make sure of mortality, but we don't want any of the animals to die. We've only had 2 instances of animals dying. Both of them were hit by cars very early on in the translocation process, but other than that, we've had no mortality, which is fantastic, given that the natural mortality rate is about 30% in pine martens up in Scotland. We want to make sure these animals are breeding. The whole point of a reintroduction project is to create a self-sustaining, expanding population. So we don't just want to bring them here and they remain stagnant. We want them to breed with each other. We've had females that have come from Scotland and given birth, but we have also had evidence of mating in the Forest of Dean, which is really positive. And we're really hoping that in the next month, we'll be checking den sites to see if any females have been giving birth this year. We want to make sure these animals start dispersing from the release site. So once the main Forest of Dean is a bit saturated with pine martens, we want to see these animals dispersing and forming new territories in surrounding woodlands. And that territory establishment is key because it really shows that landscape is appropriate for pine martens to live in. If they seem really settled, that's a really positive thing for us. So when they're released, the hard work really starts for the project team, and we have to radio track these animals. This is a better picture of the radio collar here. It's a bit of an old school way of tracking them. I can't sit at home in my pajamas and watch dots move around a map. Wish it was that easy, but we drive around the countryside and radio track these animals using this telemetry equipment, which you can see on the right. What this does is it gives us lots of different locations of pine martens. So these dots represent locations of pine martens. They don't represent individual martens. Well, they represent individual martens, but there's not however many dots there are pine martens in the landscape. So in year 1, so in 2019, we released 18 pine martens. And these are the locations that we found them at during the first 6 months they were released. So those of you that are familiar with this map, you'll see the Wye Valley runs pretty much down the middle of this map. And the main release site was in that big Forest of Dean block on the right-hand side. And what we found is that none of the martens crossed the Wye, which I was astonished at, but we just didn't see any animals moving into Wales. Many of them were moving north and northeast because the 2 rivers basically create a wedge which funneled the martens up there. But most of them did stay in that main Forest of Dean block because it is fantastic habitat for them. Last year in 2021, we released a further 17 animals. And what we found this time is that the martens looked like they were starting to occupy areas that weren't occupied by the first year martens, which is exactly what we expect. Pine martens don't like sharing territories with each other, especially females and females and males and males. So you will find this patchwork quilt of territories that pine martens form across the landscape. And we had quite a few animals that have moved across the Wye and established territories in the woodlands, just along the river, as well as over into Wentwood. I personally am not surprised because the woodlands are so much quieter. The Forest of Dean is a very busy woodland, and I suspect it has deterred quite a few of the animals establishing in the really busy areas. So if we overlay these 2 populations, what we can see is that the year 2 animals, so the red dots, have really filled in the gaps that the year 1 animals left in that habitat. And we're starting to see the red dots, the second year animals, moving further afield to find empty territories where there's less competition from other martens, there are better den sites, and potentially breeding opportunities with other animals that are already there. So on a larger scale, this is obviously just the main release area, but if we zoom out from that, all of these circles represent areas where we have pine martens. I just don't have up-to-date locations on them, but the pine martens, especially the ones released this autumn, have really spread away from the Forest of Dean. So you can see that they've followed the Wye River all the way north and have established territories up near Prestine and as well as west, not quite to the Brecon Beacons, but big big compartments of woodland over there, which have got nice empty territories. They tend to follow linear features, so that might be connected woodland, but it can also be rivers, not because they swim up the rivers, but because these rivers are often very well vegetated on either side. So it gives the martens really great corridors of movement. So this population is slowly spreading, not just through Gloucestershire, but into other counties. And eventually we're hoping that the Welsh population, which is kind of moving up across towards Preston, will eventually meet up with those animals that are in that area. And because of this kind of landscape scale movement, we really need to do some long-term monitoring to understand how these populations are expanding. So we use lots of different techniques. We use camera trapping. We've got a camera trap loan scheme where we lend out cameras to volunteers. That includes Gwent Wildlife Trust volunteers to monitor areas where we think we've got pine martens or we've had potential pine marten sightings. We use these unique bib patterns to try and figure out which animal is in that area. It is much harder than it looks. So we will have these bib shots and these drawings of the pine marten bibs, but the footage of the pine martens is usually much more challenging to identify which individual's which. But it can give us an idea of if we've got new animals in the area or if we've got females that have potentially bred, which females they are. We also have a den box, a system of den boxes which have been put up across the landscape, not only in Gloucestershire, but we do have some in Natural Resources Wales Woodland. These den boxes are good for bad pine marten habitat, which don't have enough cavities for pine martens to den in. So kind of conifer plantation is a really good area for a pine marten den box to kind of provide a temporary den site as they move into better habitat. These boxes and natural cavities provide brilliant breeding opportunities for the pine martens. So we'll check these boxes every year and any natural cavities we've had breeding in before to see if any kits or offspring have been born. This is a really great sign of success for the project, and we hope to see this every year going forwards. And one of the other things that we've got a lot of our volunteers joining in with, and Gwent Wildlife Trust volunteers, as well as some of the neighbouring wildlife trusts, is scat surveys. Walking transects along forestry paths to look for pine marten scat is the key way to monitor this population. It's the way that it's monitored in mid Wales. But if we find pine marten scats, the territorial markings of pine martens are the best way for us to figure out if we've got martens in an area. So we'll continue doing these surveys, and if any of you are interested, please do get in touch, because we always need more people to walk transects for us. And we're actually, I've got about 60 volunteers undertaking these surveys for us this month. So these are the key ways that we can look for pine martens, and that you can look for pine martens on any land that you're on, or even if you're just out walking your dog in the forest. But landscape connectivity really is the key thing for pine martens, as the others have been speaking about today. And it doesn't have to be huge areas of land. It can be hedgerows and orchards. It can be areas of rank grassland. They're all really important in joining these larger areas of habitat together for small species, as well as these larger species that can move great distances. Den boxes are really great resources where you've got conifer plantation or poor pine marten habitat. Just because your habitat's not perfect for a pine marten doesn't mean that you can't improve it. Standing and fallen dead, which is really great for martens, it's great for so many species. But if pine martens are there, then it's obviously hosting a lot of other species already. There are some things to be aware of if you're doing a lot of grey squirrel control and there are pine martens in the area. You have to be wary of what methodologies you use. But you can keep an eye out for pine martens using a lot of the techniques that I've touched on this morning, or put a camera trap out if you're really keen and you want to see one. So I realised that that was also a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
Thank you very much, Kat. It's great to hear that it sounds like a really successful project. I'm particularly exciting that they're moving over to join us here in Gwent as well. So that's all great stuff. I particularly liked all mustelids being referred to as long furry tubes. I'm gonna use that again. So we have a few questions. Bear with me. Right. One of the questions was, any recommendations for surveying, camera traps, any other methods? But I think you've probably touched on that. It does also say time of day, but obviously I think camera traps will probably be nighttime. Yeah.
So scat surveys are the standardized way. They can be a bit fruitless sometimes. Even when you've got lots of pine martens in an area, sometimes we don't find scats, but they're the best way to consistently survey for martens. Camera traps are great if you have your own land that you can put a camera out on, or you have landowner permission, if you put a camera out for about 6 weeks and bait it with a bit of jam, if there's a pine marten in the area, it will probably get there. But you have to be patient, and you might not get one for 5 weeks because their territories can be so big. So camera trapping is the best way to see one. But if you're finding scat, then certainly you will have a marten in the area. They're the 2 best techniques, yeah.
Yeah, they did also ask whether it's okay to make up the jam, peanut and egg mix themselves. I think you've said that's okay thing.
Yes, so you can. I would say if you put, we've discovered the more peanuts you put in, the more other things you attract. So you'll get a lot of mice setting off your cameras, or foxes tend to be the biggest culprit for us. As soon as you reduce it down to maybe some jam and eggs, then you're more likely to just get pine marten. If you really are really keen on getting a pine marten, you can also put take a tin of sardines in oil and kind of spray the sardine oil. You'll stink of fish, but around the camera, and it stinks, and it will attract lots of things, but pine martens will be attracted into that smell. But I would only do that once and then wait for 6 weeks and see if you get a pine marten. Depends on your dedication level.
There we go, Mark. So I also asked, would you be able to share the slides? But I know we're recording today, so if people are happy for the recording to be sort of up, if everyone's happy with that, then we'll let people know where the recording is, and people can obviously view it again and look at the slides that way. I think it's probably the best way. Right. I don't think there's any other questions. Anyone's got any other questions at all? There we go. It's nice and easy for you. Did I have any questions? I'm not sure I do. I think you've covered everything, and I've been on your training session as well, so I think I know a bit about it. But obviously, as you say, like, there's people doing volunteering through Gwent Wildlife Trust. So if people contact ourselves, if anyone's interested in walking these transects or potentially having camera traps out, maybe if they contact us, and then we can get them involved in our volunteering, or put them in touch with you, and hopefully get as much coverage as possible.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, is the evidence in the Forest of Dean that they've bred so far? I think you touched on that.
Yes. So pine martens are also very elusive, which makes monitoring them really hard. But we have in the first year we translocated animals. We had 4 females give birth. Each of them had about 3 kits in their litter, and at least 1 kit from each of those litters survived. Last spring, we definitely had at least 1 animal give birth to kits, and this year we'll be checking pine marten den boxes and cavities, so fingers crossed we'll have some more breeding. So yeah, consistently each year we have had at least 2 or 3 kits added to that population, which is really great.
Now, someone's obviously very interesting talks, thank you. But someone's asked, how do they cross the rivers? Do they swim?
I want to know this as much as you do. So I think we have a female that consistently every other night will cross the Wye. I think they can swim. In short, there have been anecdotal sightings of martens swimming to islands occasionally, but they don't swim as regularly or as naturally as otters do. So I think they generally will use bridges that are available. There's lots of bridges kind of around Redbrook. There's old abandoned railway bridges or iron bridges there. And I think the martens are using them, as well as potentially some of the road bridges to cross back and forth across the Wye.
Have you tried any camera traps on the bridges at all?
No, I haven't, because I don't think I have landowner permission at the moment.
Right.
And so many bridges, I think it might be a bit of a needle in a haystack situation.
Right, yeah.
So I've kind of accepted my fate that I'm just going to have to not know where they're crossing. But I don't know if I think Gwent Wildlife Trust have some reserves that are quite near the edge of the river, so we might find that we see where they're passing through at least. I would love to put cameras out at all of the bridges, but I don't think I have enough cameras.
No, they might get nicked as well. There we go.
Yeah.
How much and how far do they come out of woodland to forage?
It really depends on what habitat they're coming out into. So a lot of people say generally pine martens will not cross open ground, but we know from radio tracking that that's not true. They will go into kind of tussocky grassland. Their favorite food is field voles. So field voles you get in really rank grassland. So they will move into that kind of habitat quite happily. I don't have a set distance that I could give you, but if there was a field full of rough grassland, I wouldn't be surprised to see a pine marten in the middle of it, but they wouldn't be spending a huge amount of their time there.
Thank you. Now, does the presence of pine martens have an effect on other mustelids living in the same area?
Yeah, so we get that question quite a lot, and I would generally say no. So they have a very different, the most common or the most similarly sized mustelid to a pine marten is probably a polecat, but polecats have very different habitat preferences and dietary preferences. So you don't see much kind of competitive crossover between the two. Because pine martens are arboreal, it really separates them from the rest of the mustelid species, and because they're very solitary, they really avoid any kind of interaction with other mustelids. You're more likely to see crossover with pine martens and foxes, but again, they very rarely have any direct interaction with each other. They just have probably the most similar diet out of all the other mustelids plus foxes. So generally, no, we don't know of any negative impact, but pine martens are still recovering. Polecats are just recovering. We don't know a lot about stoats and weasels, so we might find in 10 years' time that there are some interactions between them, but at the moment we don't know.
Right, yeah, thank you. And one final question. Do you find squirrels in the pine marten boxes?
In the pine marten boxes?
Yeah.
The question was? Yeah, more than pine martens. So unfortunately / brilliantly, the Forest of Dean has so many natural cavities that the pine martens don't really have need for the boxes, even though we have about 50 boxes up in the main block. And they tend to always be in kind of old yew trees or old beech tree cavities. The grey squirrels quite like the pine marten boxes. So we do find maybe 5 or 10 boxes out of 50 might have grey squirrels denning in them, which we just have to clear out. But yeah, they will use the boxes, which is a bit of a pain. Birds will use them as well. They sometimes nest in the entrance holes. But it's a natural cavity. So, you know, all of these species do use cavities and they provide good habitat for them. We've even got a woodpecker living in one of them. So, yeah.
They're not wasted then if the pine marten.
They're not wasted, really. Yeah, it's just frustrating about the grey squirrels. But I'm sure if another species found that box with a squirrel in it, you know, the grey squirrel would be evicted. So.
Yeah. That's right. Thank you very much. That was great. So it just remains me to probably thank everybody. So thank you, Steve, and to Sorrel, and to Lawrence, and to Kat for all your talks. And big thank you to Larry for doing most of the organising for all of this. I can just sit back and just talk a bit on the day, which is great. Thanks, Larry. So yeah, so thank you very much. And obviously thank you to everybody who's come along today. So thank you for coming along today, but also thank you for managing your land so great over the last year, and hopefully continue to do so into the future. And we shall obviously, any queries you can about today, you can obviously email me during the week, and hopefully we'll see you all next year in a pleasant village hall with a slab of cake. There we go. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you very much. And there'll be a recording of this, which we'll put up, and I'll email around where it is in case people want to watch any bits again. So thank you very much. Bye.
One final thing, if people could.
Oh, yeah, questionnaire. Well done.
We have a feedback form, and we do really appreciate hearing what you thought of the talk today. And there's an opportunity to give suggestions of what you'd like to hear a little bit more about. So that will guide us in future years and who we approach to give talks. So if you wouldn't mind, I've popped the link in the chat box there. If you miss it, then we can also email it round. So it shouldn't take too long. It's just a couple of minutes, a few questions. Everybody.
There we go, thank you. And help us make it better for next year. So there we go. Well remembered, Larry. I was already thinking about lunch. There we go. Right, Joe. Thank you very much. Cheerio, everybody.